before the Archons built their planetary prisons, before the first law was handed down from a throne of ignorance, before the material world was shaped into the Kenoma you woke up inside this morning, there was a creator, and he was not who you think he was. Every tradition in the Western world has handed you a picture of God, sovereign, complete, all-knowing, the final word on reality. But there is another picture, older, stranger, more psychologically precise than anything the Orthodox tradition dared to preserve. It is the picture the Gnostics kept. The picture that was buried in sealed jars in the Egyptian desert, hidden from councils and fires, and the long institutional project of deciding what you were allowed to know. It is the picture of a creator who is not evil, and that is the first thing you have to understand, because the moment you assume evil, you miss the entire diagnosis. What the Gnostics described was something far more unsettling than evil. They described a God who is catastrophically, completely, and permanently wrong about himself, and his name is the Demiurge. The word itself is Greek, demiurgos. It means craftsman, a maker, an artisan, someone who works with materials and shapes them into something functional. Not a poet, not a mystic, a craftsman. Plato used the term first, in a dialogue called the Timaeus, written around 360 BCE. In Plato's account, the Demiurge is essentially benevolent. He looks at the eternal forms, the perfect, unchanging archetypes of things, and he fashions the material world in their image. His motivation is goodness. His limitation is matter itself, which resists perfection the way clay resists the potter's ideal vision. Plato's Demiurge fails to make a perfect world, but that failure is the failure of his materials, not his intentions. He is doing his best with what he has. He is, in Plato's reading, genuinely good. The Gnostics inherited this framework. They kept the structure, a craftsman god who fabricates the material world, and then they did something philosophically radical with it. They interrogated the premise. They looked at the actual world. Not the ideal world of Platonic philosophy. The actual world, with its suffering that has no discernible purpose, its grinding indifference to individual lives, its biological processes that consume and waste and decay without the slightest apparent concern for the consciousness trapped inside them. They looked at the architecture of ordinary human experience, the anxiety, the hunger, the strange persistent sense that something essential is missing, and they asked a question the Platonic tradition hadn't fully pressed. What if this doesn't look like the work of a being who knows what it's doing? Not a being who is doing his best with imperfect materials. A being who is competent, even extraordinarily capable, but fundamentally, structurally self-deceived. A being who builds with genuine skill and genuine intention and still produces suffering, not because matter resists him, but because he cannot see the dimension of reality that would tell him what matter actually is and what the beings within it actually contain. That is the Gnostic Demiurge. And the distinction from Plato is everything. Plato's Demiurge has a vision of the good and struggles to realize it. The Gnostic Demiurge has a vision of the good that is itself incomplete, shaped by a self-knowledge that has a ceiling he cannot perceive. He is not working against an external limitation. He is working from an internal one. His ignorance is not about his materials. It is about himself. This is what makes the Gnostic account so psychologically penetrating, because the world produced by a genuinely good but self-deceived creator looks exactly like this world. It has real order, real elegance, real moments of something that approaches beauty. It also has suffering that no amount of theodicy quite accounts for, hierarchies of power that reward the wrong things, and a persistent low-level sense in the beings who inhabit it that they were built for something the world they live in cannot provide. The Gnostic diagnosis doesn't begin with a villain. It begins with a craftsman who cannot see past his own horizon. And before we go any further, this matters. The Gnostics were not proto-Manichaeans. They were not drawing a simple map of evil God versus good God, dark matter versus pure spirit. The most sophisticated Gnostic schools, and we will return to them repeatedly throughout this account, particularly the Valentinian tradition, were at pains to distinguish between malice and ignorance. They were adamant that the Demiurge is not evil. He is wrong. Those are not the same thing. A being who is evil knows what it is doing and chooses harm. A being who is wrong does not know what it is doing, and cannot choose differently, because the self-knowledge that would enable a different choice is precisely what it lacks. The emotional and spiritual implications of this distinction are vast. If the Demiurge were evil, the correct response to the world he made would be rage, contempt, aggressive rejection. Some Gnostic groups moved in this direction, and the orthodox critics found them easy to caricature. But if the Demiurge is wrong, genuinely, structurally, non-maliciously wrong, then the world he made is something more complex than a prison. It is the honest attempt of a limited consciousness to create something good. Its failures are the failures of that limitation, not of malice. And that changes everything about how you navigate it. We are going to map the full architecture of who the Demiurge is, where he came from, what he built, what he missed, and what that means for the deepest question any human being can ask. What am I, actually, at the core? But to understand the Demiurge, you have to understand what produced him. And that story begins not with the Demiurge, but with Sophia. In the beginning, in the Gnostic beginning, the one the Nag Hammadi texts preserve, there is the Pleroma. We covered the Pleroma in depth in a previous video on this channel, the full story of the Pleroma. And if you haven't watched that, it will give you the complete foundation for what follows here. But here is what you need to know for the Demiurge's story specifically. The Pleroma is not a place, it is a state. A condition of absolute divine completeness. The fullness that the word itself translates as. A reality in which all divine beings, called aeons, exist in paired, complementary, self-sustaining unity. No lack, no separation, no hunger that nothing in existence can satisfy. The aeons are not independent beings in the way we think of individual persons. They are paired in what the Gnostic texts call syzygies, complementary dyads, each aeon balanced by its counterpart, each pair a complete expression of some aspect of the divine fullness. Together, they constitute the Pleroma's total self-expression. Sophia is one of these aeons. In the Valentinian numbering, and the Valentinian school developed the most sophisticated and internally consistent Gnostic cosmological account. Sophia is the 30th and youngest of the aeons, positioned at the outermost edge of the Pleroma's fullness. Her name means wisdom, and the quality of her character in the cosmological narrative is not stupidity or weakness. It is the opposite. She burns with a desire so pure, so total, that it becomes the very thing that undoes her. She wants to know the monad. The monad, also called the invisible spirit, the unbegotten Father, is the ultimate source from which all the eons and the entire Pleroma ultimately derive. It is beyond comprehension in any direct sense. Even within the Pleroma, knowledge of the monad flows through the structure of the syzygies, through the mediation of the divine relational architecture, not through direct unilateral access. Sophia wants to bypass that mediation. She wants to reach the source alone, without her counterpart, without the relational balance the Pleroma requires. This is not, the Gnostic texts are careful to insist, an evil impulse. It is a desire born of love, of genuine, overwhelming spiritual yearning, the purest motivation, the deepest sincerity, and it produces a catastrophe. What flows from Sophia's unilateral reaching is not gnosis. It is something else, something that carries the shape of her intention, the form of a divine creative impulse, but lacks the living connection to the Pleroma's fullness that would give it genuine divine coherence. It is a kind of spiritual substance, formless, caught between the dimensions of divine and material reality, containing the energy of Sophia's longing, without the orienting knowledge that would direct that energy toward something whole. The Valentinian texts describe this emanation as a kind of passion. The Greek word used is sometimes translated as suffering or desire, that Sophia produces outside the boundaries of the Pleroma. She has reached beyond the architecture that sustains her, and what has come through the reaching is real, but it is incomplete. It is a divine creative impulse without a home, without self-knowledge, without the relational context that would tell it what it is. From this substance, this unintended byproduct of Sophia's yearning, the Demiurge is formed. He is born outside the Pleroma. He has never been inside it. He has no memory of it, no access to it, no framework for even imagining it. He does not know that he came from Sophia. He does not know that Sophia came from the Pleroma. He does not know the Pleroma exists. All he has is himself and the vast, unstructured space around him. He looks around. He finds no one above him, nothing greater than himself in any direction his perception can reach, and he concludes, reasonably, from the inside of that perception, that he is alone, that he is the first, that he is the highest. He is wrong. But he doesn't know he's wrong, and this is not a small error. This is the foundational error of the entire cosmos, a being of genuine power and genuine creative capacity, operating from a misidentification so complete that it has never once been questioned from the inside. The Apocryphon of John, discovered among the Nag Hammadi library, buried near the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi in 1945, a text scholars date to around the 2nd century CE, describes this moment with the kind of directness that stops the reader cold. The Demiurge, moving through the void, shapes the cosmos. And then he speaks. He makes a declaration. I am a jealous God. There is no other God beside me. You know those words. They are from Exodus, from Deuteronomy, the foundational self-description of the God of the Hebrew Bible. And the Gnostics looked at those words, really looked at them, with the kind of attention that refuses to look away, and heard something in them that the Orthodox tradition had always passed over quickly. What kind of God needs to declare himself jealous? What kind of God needs to announce that there are no other gods? A being who is genuinely the sole and complete divine reality does not make that announcement. The announcement reveals anxiety. It reveals an awareness, however suppressed, however unexamined, that there might be something above him that he cannot account for. The declaration is not a lie. The Demiurge believes it completely. He has never encountered anything that contradicts it. But belief and truth are not the same thing. And the Gnostic tradition, in its reading of this declaration, identifies in it the precise psychological signature of a being who knows, at some level he cannot consciously access, that something is above him, and whose response to that unlocatable anxiety is not inquiry but insistence. He declares his supremacy more forcefully because he cannot disprove the alternative, the blind God. That is one of his other names in the Gnostic texts. Samael, the blind God, not blind in his eyes, blind in his understanding, unable to perceive the dimension of reality that would correct him, and Sophia knows what he cannot see. Some texts describe a voice, reaching from the Pleroma, from a direction the Demiurge has no category for, no receiver tuned to, saying simply, "You are wrong, Samael." He cannot find the source. He cannot process the direction it comes from. He absorbs it as another piece of evidence for the anxiety he cannot name. And he keeps building. The Gnostics had a name for the world the Demiurge made. They called it the Kenoma. Kenoma means emptiness. Not the emptiness of nothing, not the void before creation, but the emptiness of something that exists without fullness, something that has form and structure and apparent order, but is missing, at its foundation, the quality that the Pleroma possesses completely. The Kenoma is the Demiurge's world, and understanding what the Kenoma actually is, not as a cosmic address, but as a lived condition, is what transforms Gnostic cosmology from an elaborate ancient mythology into something urgently relevant to the life you are living right now. The Demiurge does not build alone. He creates with the assistance of subordinate powers that the Gnostic texts call archons, from the Greek arche, meaning ruler or beginning. The archons are the Demiurge's co-creators and administrators, and in the symbolic architecture of Gnostic cosmology, they are identified with the 7 classical planets known to the ancient world: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. Each archon governs a sphere, and these spheres together constitute what the Gnostics called the High Marmine, fate, the system of cause and effect, the interlocking web of necessity that governs material existence from birth to death. The Apocryphon of John gives the archons names and specific attributes, and this is where the Gnostic account moves from cosmological architecture into something that functions as a precise map of the human interior. The archons are not just powers in the cosmic sky, they are patterns within consciousness. Recognizing them is not an exercise in ancient mythology. It is an exercise in self-knowledge of a very specific, very uncomfortable kind. The first archon is Athoth. His face, in the symbolic language of the text, is that of a sheep. His attribute is a distorted goodness, the goodness of performance, of virtue displayed for social reward, of kindness that is fundamentally about how the kind person feels about themselves rather than about the actual need of the person being helped. You have felt Athoth operating. It is the moment you realize your generosity contains, somewhere beneath the surface, the need to be seen as generous. The second is Eloio, with the face of a donkey. His domain is a distorted foreknowledge, not genuine wisdom but pattern matching, that mistakes itself for understanding. The intellectual habit of thinking you know a thing because you have encountered its surface before. The person who knows the name of everything and the meaning of nothing. That is Eloio's territory. The third is Astaphios, with the face of a hyena. His attribute is a distorted divinity, the performance of spiritual presence, religious pride, the confusion between the appearance of holiness and actual contact with something genuine, the person who is devout in every visible way and empty at the center. The fourth is Yao, associated with fire and jealousy, his face that of a seven-headed serpent. His attribute is lordship, the drive for dominance, for centrality, for the organization of every relationship and every environment around one's own importance. The part of human consciousness that cannot enter a room without immediately establishing, consciously or not, where it sits in the hierarchy. That experiences any challenge to its authority as an existential threat. Yao is perhaps the most culturally visible of the archons in the world the Demiurge has made, because the Demiurge's own character is closest to Yao's pattern. The fifth is Sabaoth, with the face of a dragon. His domain is kingdom, not the act of ruling but the infrastructure of ruling, the institutional and bureaucratic forms through which power maintains itself after the original justification for that power has long since dissolved. Every organization that perpetuates itself, not because it still serves a genuine function, but because its own continuation has become the function. The sixth is Adonin, with the face of an ape. Envy, the perceptual mode that cannot encounter another being's good without measuring it against its own. The zero-sum mind that experiences someone else's gain as its own loss. Adonin is the operating logic of comparison. And if you want to identify the archon most thoroughly embedded in the social architecture of the contemporary world, Adonin's fingerprints are on every platform, designed to make you evaluate your life against someone else's highlights. The seventh is Sabbaday, with the face of fire. His attribute is a distorted understanding, the confident misapprehension that mistakes its own categories for the structure of reality itself. The person who has a complete explanation for everything, who selects evidence to fit a framework rather than building frameworks from evidence, who has explained the world without ever genuinely encountering it. 7 archons, 7 distortions of consciousness, 7 patterns that the Demiurge, in building his world from the raw material of his own limited self-knowledge, has embedded in the fabric of the Kenoma, not as deliberate traps, but as structural expressions of what he is. He cannot create beyond himself. He cannot give his creation what he doesn't have, and what he doesn't have is the self-knowledge that would allow him to see the distortions for what they are. So he builds them into everything, into the institutions, into the social hierarchies, into the architecture of human consciousness itself. And here is what the Gnostics are saying when they lay out this map. Look at the world. Look inside yourself, and tell me, honestly, that you don't recognize these patterns operating right now, in this moment, in the reactions you have to other people's success, in the way your institutions perpetuate themselves, in the certainty you feel about frameworks you have never actually examined. The Kenoma is not a place you go after death. It is the world you are in. The archons are not gatekeepers you encounter at the edge of the solar system. They are the internal weather of ordinary consciousness in a world built by a creator who does not know himself. This is the architecture of what the Demiurge made, and we have not yet arrived at the most extraordinary part of the story, which is what he missed when he looked at his own creation and believed he understood it completely. The Demiurge looked at the human being he had made and saw everything he had put there. The body, assembled across 365 contributing powers, according to the Apocryphon of John, each archonic intelligence contributing its particular piece of the biological architecture: the psyche, the soul structure, the complex emotional and cognitive machinery through which a human being organizes experience and constructs an identity. He saw all of this, and he was satisfied. He believed, completely and without a shadow of suspicion, that he understood what he had made. He was wrong in the most total way it is possible to be wrong, because as the Demiurge and his archons were shaping the human being, something else was happening. Something he could not see, could not prevent, and could not account for afterward. Sophia acted. Depending on which Gnostic text you are reading, she breathes into the human form, or the higher divine power, working through her, inserts something into the architecture the Demiurge has constructed, something that does not belong to his creative domain, something from a dimension of reality his perception has no instrument for detecting. The Gnostics called it the pneuma, the breath, the divine spark, and it is not a metaphor. In the Gnostic framework, it is the most real thing in the human being, more real than the body, which will decay, more real than the psyche, which was assembled by archonic hands. It is a fragment of the pleroma itself, sealed inside the kenoma, like a star enclosed in a cave. Impossible by the logic of the Demiurge's world, inexplicably present, hidden so completely within the matter the Demiurge made, that he walks past it every time he examines his creation. He looks at the human being, he sees what he made, he concludes, "This is entirely mine. I understand everything here." He has never been more wrong. What he has missed is the most important thing in the universe. A piece of the fullness, the pleroma's quality of completeness and undivided light, compressed into material existence and beating quietly beneath every thought, every emotion, every constructed layer of identity the archons helped assemble. It is there right now. It has been there since the first human being drew breath in the Demiurge's world. It will be there until the last one does. The Demiurge did not plan this. He did not consent to it. He does not know it happened. This is what makes the Gnostic account of the divine spark so structurally unlike any other theological claim about the human soul. In Orthodox frameworks, the soul is something God gave you. It is a gift from the Creator, which means the Creator knows it is there, knows what it is, and can, in principle, take it back or judge it, or withdraw his sustaining presence from it. The Creator retains authority over what he created. In the Gnostic account, the pneuma was not given by the Creator of this world. It was hidden here without his knowledge. It belongs to a source he has never accessed. It operates according to principles he has no framework for. He cannot sustain it, because he didn't generate it. He cannot withdraw it, because it doesn't derive from him. He cannot judge it, because his jurisdiction simply does not reach to the dimension it comes from. The Demiurge has no authority over the pneuma, not through malice withheld, not through limitation acknowledged. He has no authority because he doesn't know the category exists. He built a world. He built it well, within his understanding. He placed his archons in their spheres, established the Hymarmene, the great system of fate and consequence that governs material existence. And he began to administer his creation with the full sincerity of a being who believes himself to be the highest power in reality. And inside every creature subject to his administration, Sophia had already planted something he will never own. This is the central irony of the Demiurge's entire existence, and it is not a small one. The most powerful being in the material world, the constructor of stars and oceans and the laws of physics and the architecture of biological life, has been walking through his own creation for the entirety of its history, administering and governing and demanding worship, and he has never once perceived the thing that is most essentially present in every being he oversees. He built a prison and did not know that inside every prisoner there was already a key. Not a key he forgot to remove, not a key someone smuggled in later, a key that was placed there before the prison walls were finished, by a hand he did not see, from a direction he does not have a word for. The divine spark is already in you. It has always been there. The Demiurge has looked at you your entire life and missed it completely. And the question the Gnostic tradition puts to every human being is not whether the spark exists. It does. The question is whether you know it is there. Here is what the Gnostic teachers understood that almost no one else in the ancient world articulated with this degree of precision. The Demiurge does not need to actively suppress the divine spark. He does not need a deliberate program of spiritual suppression, no secret agenda, no conspiracy of concealment. His world suppresses it automatically, structurally, simply by being what it is. A world built by a creator who does not know the pneuma exists will, by definition, be a world that makes no space for the pneuma. Not because space was deliberately withheld, because the architect had no concept to design around. You cannot build a room for something you don't know exists. The Kenoma is a world optimized for Kenoma-level concerns: matter, energy, biological survival, social organization, the archonic patterns of dominance, comparison, false certainty, institutional self-perpetuation. These are the concerns the Demiurge understands, and so these are the concerns his world rewards. It has entire systems devoted to them, economies built around the drive for acquisition and status, religious structures built around the performance of obedience and the management of fear, cultural environments built around the constant measurement of the self against external standards. The Gnostic name for the state in which a person is fully absorbed in all of this is sleep. Sometimes the texts call it drunkenness. The divine spark, intoxicated by its identification with the constructed layer, stumbles through the Kenoma without waking to what it actually is. And the Gospel of Truth, one of the most luminous texts recovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, one that many scholars believe was written by Valentinus himself around 150 CE, opens with an image that makes this state viscerally comprehensible. It describes the fundamental error of not knowing oneself as producing a fog. Dense, formless, directionless fog. Beings move through it. They reach for things to hold on to, and the things cannot hold them, and they fall, and they reach for something else. This is the Kenoma. This is what it feels like from the inside, and the divine spark within each being is a light that could dissolve the fog. Not from outside, not by some external intervention. From within the being itself, the pneuma is already capable of cutting through the density of the constructed layer, but only if it is recognized, only if the being stops long enough and turns inward far enough to let the light do what it is already capable of doing. Stopping is the problem. In the Demiurge's world, stopping feels dangerous. It is not rewarded, it is not accommodated. The entire architecture of the Kenoma is built around motion, acquiring, performing, comparing, seeking, building, maintaining, defending. The archonic patterns are all energetically expensive, all consuming, all demanding of constant attention and constant activity. Stillness, the kind of deep inward stillness in which the pneuma can be perceived, is the one thing the Demiurge's world has no infrastructure for. It doesn't punish it directly, it simply ensures that there is always something else to do, always another demand, always another archonic concern pressing for attention at precisely the moment when the divine spark might have broken through. This is why the Gnostic teachers placed such extraordinary emphasis on the work of recognition as a practice, not a single event, not a moment of enlightenment that solves everything and ends the fog permanently. A practice, daily, recurring, humble, honest. The ongoing work of catching the archonic patterns in the act, of seeing Yao's drive for dominance arising in yourself and naming it for what it is, of feeling Adonin's comparative envy activate in response to someone else's good news and recognizing the source, of noticing Sabbataios's false certainty presenting itself as wisdom and understanding what is actually happening. Before Gnosis, you are the pattern. When Yao's dominance drive arises, it is you wanting to dominate. There is no gap between the pattern and your identification with it. You act from it, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, because inside the Demiurge's framework, it is. After Gnosis, after the initial recognition of the pneuma and the archonic architecture, something shifts. The pattern still arises. It does not simply evaporate because you have understood its source. These are deep grooves in human consciousness, patterns that in the Gnostic cosmological account have been running in the collective psyche since the first human being took shape under archonic hands. They do not dissolve overnight, but a gap opens. The pattern arises, and you see it arising. You are not the pattern, you are the awareness observing the pattern. And in that gap, however brief, however easily closed again by the next wave of archonic noise, the pneuma has a moment, not to fight the pattern, not to suppress it through willpower or shame it into submission, simply to be what it is, underneath it, undisturbed by it, orienting from a different place entirely. This is the freedom the Gnostic path is actually describing. Not liberation from the conditions of material existence, not the ability to float above the archon's domain, but the interior freedom of a person who knows which layer is the deepest one, and who can return to that knowledge even after the fog has closed in again. The Demiurge's world is extraordinarily effective at what it does, but it cannot permanently extinguish what it does not know is there. There is a moment in the Apocryphon of John, one of the texts discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, that the Gnostics treated as the single most revealing thing the Demiurge ever said. Not because it is obscure, because it is the opposite of obscure. Because it is one of the most recognizable sentences in the entire Western religious tradition, spoken in one of the most central, most sacred, most endlessly repeated texts in human history. The Demiurge, moving through the void he has created, having fashioned the material world according to his understanding, makes a declaration. I am a jealous God. There is no other God beside me. You know those words. If you grew up anywhere within reach of the Abrahamic tradition, you have heard them your entire life. They appear in Exodus. They appear in Deuteronomy. They are among the foundational self-descriptions of the God of the Hebrew Bible, embedded in the covenant that structured an entire civilization's relationship to the divine. The Gnostics read those words carefully. They did not gloss over them the way the Orthodox tradition had always found ways to gloss over them. They sat with them and heard something that the institutional reading had always preferred not to hear. What kind of God declares himself jealous? Not a being who is genuinely the sole and complete divine reality. The absolute, the monad, the invisible spirit from which all things ultimately derive, has no anxiety to express. It has no competitors to preempt. It has no awareness of alternatives that might threaten its position, because there is nothing outside of it that could constitute a threat. The monad does not announce its supremacy. Announcement requires an audience, an alternative, a potential challenge worth addressing. But the Demiurge announces. He declares. He insists, with the particular insistence of a being who is, at some level beneath his own awareness, not entirely certain. Jealousy, in the Gnostic reading, is the tell. Jealousy is what arises when something you want might be taken by another. It presupposes a world of scarcity, of competition, of genuine alternatives. A being who experiences jealousy is a being who knows, somewhere below the level of its own conscious acknowledgement, that there is something it might lose, something it does not securely possess, something above it that it cannot account for. The Demiurge is not lying when he makes his declaration. He believes it completely. He has never encountered anything that directly contradicts it. He is the most powerful being in his experience, the creator of everything in his experience, and his experience is all he has access to. So the conclusion is, from within his framework, perfectly reasonable. He is the highest. There is no other. The problem is that his experience is not all of reality. It is a bubble within reality, and he does not know the bubble has walls, but something else does. The Apocryphon of John describes what happens immediately after the Great Declaration. A voice comes from somewhere above him, from the pleroma, beyond his reach, beyond his perception, beyond the ceiling of his entire cosmological framework. And the voice says simply, "You are wrong, Samael." Samael, one of his other names in the Gnostic texts. The blind God, not evil, not malicious, blind. He cannot see what spoke. He cannot locate the source. He has no framework for the direction the voice came from, because his entire conception of reality does not include anything above him. He cannot comprehend what above even means in this context, because his cosmological architecture is the whole structure he knows, and it places him at the top. So the voice becomes one more thing he cannot account for, one more anomaly that feeds the unacknowledged anxiety beneath his declaration. He cannot name the source of his unease. He cannot face it directly. He returns to what he knows: administration, governance, the enforcement of the Heimarmene, the issuance of laws. This is a portrait of a specific kind of suffering, the suffering of enormous power combined with fundamental ignorance, the suffering of a being who is doing everything within his considerable capacity and still cannot locate the source of the disquiet that runs beneath all of it. He builds more, he governs more, he demands more. The anxiety does not resolve, because the anxiety's source is not something that building and governing and demanding can address. The voice he cannot locate has been speaking since before he made his declaration. It has been speaking ever since. He cannot hear it clearly, not because the signal is weak, because he has no receiver built for that frequency. The pneuma within human beings has that receiver. This is the precise asymmetry at the heart of the Gnostic account. The Demiurge is the most powerful being in the material world. He governs the Heimarmene, the entire system of fate and consequence that structures material existence. But the human beings subject to his governance contain within them a capacity he does not possess, the ability to hear what he cannot hear, to perceive what he cannot perceive, to recognize the Pleroma's transmission through the divine spark that Sophia embedded in his creation without his knowledge. He declared himself God. And inside the beings he was declaring his supremacy over, the actual source of divinity was already quietly broadcasting. The declaration reveals the anxiety reveals the ignorance reveals the gap, and the gap is where Gnosis lives. The Gnostic texts do not give the Demiurge a single name. They give him several, and each name is a diagnosis. Each name isolates a specific dimension of what he is, a different angle on the same fundamental condition. To understand the names is to understand the Gnostic account of the Demiurge at a depth that the cosmological narrative alone does not supply. The first name, and the one you have already encountered, is Samael. It comes from Aramaic, Sam, meaning blind, El, meaning God, the blind God. This is not a term of contempt in the Gnostic usage. It is a clinical description. Samael is not wicked. He is not cruel in any simple sense. He is blind. He operates without the self-knowledge that would allow him to see what he actually is, and what his creation actually contains. The blindness is not a punishment. It is the structural consequence of his origin, born outside the Pleroma, with no memory of it, no access to it, no framework for even imagining it. He is blind because he has never seen. The second name is Saklas. Also from Aramaic, it means fool. Not fool in the casual modern sense of someone who makes an occasional poor decision. Fool, in the ancient sense, of a being who operates from a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. The kind of fool described in Proverbs, the one who has a complete and confident picture of the world that does not correspond to how the world actually works. Saklas is confident. Saklas is active. Saklas builds and governs and declares. And the entire enterprise is built on a foundation that is not what Saklas believes it to be. The fool who doesn't know he is a fool is more dangerous and more tragic than the fool who knows it, because the fool who knows it can potentially correct course. Saklas has no corrective mechanism because the flaw is in the instrument used for correction. The third name is the most famous and the most theologically rich, Yaldabaoth. The etymology is debated among scholars, but several interpretations have been offered, with the most widely cited reading something like Child of Chaos or Son of the Void. The name itself points to the conditions of the Demiurge's origin. He did not emerge from the Pleroma in the way the Aeons do, through deliberate divine emanation within the context of the pleromatic fullness. He emerged from the unintended consequence of Sophia's passion, from the formless, chaotic substance that her reaching produced outside the proper context of pleromatic creative action. He is, in the most literal etymological sense, a child of the wrong conditions, not evil by nature, but shaped entirely by the circumstances of his birth, which included no pleroma, no syzygy, no relational context of divine fullness, just the void, and himself, and the creative energy he inherited from his mother without the self-knowledge that would have oriented it correctly. Yaldabaoth, child of chaos, born into the void and concluding, reasonably enough from within the void, that the void is all there is. These three names together tell the complete story more economically than any amount of cosmological narrative. Blind, foolish, born of chaos. These are not three separate accusations. They are three angles on a single condition. A being of enormous creative power, operating without the self-knowledge that would make that power genuinely divine. And here is what I think deserves more sustained attention than it typically receives in discussions of Gnostic cosmology. The Demiurge's multiple names suggest that the Gnostics were not describing a single, fixed entity so much as a pattern that can manifest across different scales and different contexts, a pattern recognizable by its defining characteristics: power without self-knowledge, certainty without genuine understanding, the declaration of supremacy over a reality that has not been fully seen. You do not need to look far to find that pattern operating. The Gnostic teachers were pointing at something they could observe in the social and institutional reality around them, in the Roman imperial system that declared its own supremacy over all of history, in the religious institutions that claimed final authority over access to the divine, in every system of power that had acquired such complete confidence in its own categories that it had lost the capacity to recognize what those categories were missing. Samael is the name for the pattern when it blinds. Saklas is the name when it fools. Yaldabaoth is the name when it generates, producing worlds and systems and institutions from a place of fundamental ontological confusion. All three names are true simultaneously. The Demiurge is always all three. And the reason the Gnostic teachers preserved these names, transmitted them carefully, across generations in communities that risked genuine persecution for doing so, is that named patterns can be recognized. What has no name is much harder to see. When you know to look for Samael's blindness in a system, you can identify it. When you know the shape of Saklas's foolish certainty, you can notice when you are inhabiting it yourself. When you know that Yaldabaoth builds from chaos while declaring order, you can recognize the architecture. The names are not mythology. They are diagnostic tools. Use them. So we have the names. We have the diagnosis. Now let's talk about what the Demiurge actually constructed, because the Gnostic account of creation is not just a story about cosmic origins. It is a precise description of the world you are living in right now, not the world as it appears on the surface. The world as it operates underneath the surface. The Gnostics called the material world the Kenoma. This is the critical term, and it deserves to be held carefully. Kenoma does not mean evil place. It does not mean hell. It means emptiness, deficiency, the state of being without the fullness that the pleroma represents. The Kenoma is not the opposite of the pleroma, the way darkness is the opposite of light in some simple moral drama. The Kenoma is more like the shadow cast by something that tried to be a light source but was not quite bright enough. It has real structure. It has genuine complexity. It contains real beauty and real order and real mathematical elegance. But it is missing something foundational, something that would orient all of that structure toward genuine completeness. And the reason it is missing that something is that the being who built it does not possess that something himself. The Demiurge builds from what he has. This is actually the most important thing to understand about the Kenoma's character. It is not designed to torture. It is not designed to imprison in any deliberately cruel sense. It is designed according to the Demiurge's best understanding of what reality should look like. And his best understanding is genuinely sophisticated. The physical laws of the cosmos, the mathematical regularities that allow stars to form and orbits to stabilize and carbon to bond in exactly the ways that eventually produce living organisms, all of that is the Demiurge's craftsmanship. And by the measure of craftsmanship, it is extraordinary. But craftsmanship without self-knowledge produces a specific kind of flaw, not a flaw you can point to in any one piece of the design, a flaw that is distributed through the entire architecture, a flaw that shows up not in the beauty of any given moment, but in the overall direction of the system. The Kenoma is a system that is extraordinarily good at producing experiences, but structurally incapable of producing fulfillment. You can accumulate every experience the Kenoma offers, every pleasure, every achievement, every relationship, every moment of genuine connection and genuine wonder. and the Kenoma will still not have given you what the Pleroma is, because the Pleroma is not an accumulation of experiences. The Pleroma is the ground from which experience is possible at all, and the Kenoma, for all its complexity, does not contain that ground. It approximates it, endlessly, elaborately, sometimes heartbreakingly closely. But approximation is not arrival. This is why the Gnostics used the language of exile and homesickness, not because they were melodramatic, because they were precise. The divine spark within a human being is from the Pleroma. It carries the Pleroma's quality as its native condition, and when that spark is enclosed in the Kenoma, it experiences what any living thing experiences when placed in the wrong environment. Not necessarily agony, but a persistent, low-level, inarticulate wrongness, a sense that the conditions are not quite right, that something essential is missing, that the available nourishment, however plentiful, does not touch the actual hunger. You know this feeling. You have known it your whole life. It arrives most clearly in the moments after you have gotten what you wanted. The achievement lands, the relationship begins, the experience happens. And then, beneath the genuine satisfaction, beneath the real pleasure, there it is again, the quiet, persistent sense that this is not quite it, that the fullness you were reaching for has once again shifted slightly beyond your grasp. The Gnostics were not calling that feeling a pathology. They were calling it information. They were saying that the hunger that no Kenoma experience can permanently satisfy is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that you carry something the Kenoma was not built to feed. The Kenoma cannot feed the Pneuma because the Demiurge did not know the Pneuma existed when he designed it. This is not a small design oversight. It is the central structural fact of the entire material world. The world was built without the most important part of its inhabitants in mind, not out of malice, out of ignorance that is so total, so foundational, so thoroughly invisible to the one who possesses it, that it functions as a kind of architectural law. The buildings of the Kenoma are all beautiful in their own way, but none of them have a door that opens toward the Pleroma, because the architect has never been to the Pleroma, because the architect does not know there is a Pleroma to open toward. This is the Kenoma. This is what the Demiurge built. Understand it clearly, without contempt but without illusion, and the Gnostic project begins to make urgent, practical sense. The Demiurge does not govern alone. This is crucial to understand. The Kenoma is not administered by a single central authority, operating through direct command. It is administered through a distributed system of subordinate powers, each governing a domain, each expressing a specific distortion of consciousness, each woven so deeply into the fabric of ordinary human experience that most people never identify them as anything other than simply how reality works. The Gnostics called these powers the archons. The Greek word means rulers, but these are not rulers in the ordinary political sense. They are something more fundamental. They are the structural principles of the Kenoma, the organizing patterns of a world built by a creator who lacks self-knowledge. And the Apocryphon of John, that foundational text, discovered sealed in a clay jar near Nag Hammadi in 1945, gives them names and faces and specific domains. 7 archons, 7 faces of the Kenoma's fundamental distortions. The first is Athoth, associated with the face of a sheep. His domain is goodness, but not genuine goodness. Goodness that performs, goodness that requires an audience. The psychological pattern of kindness, deployed as social currency, of generosity, structured around the need to be seen as generous. Every human being has encountered Athoth in themselves. The moment when you did something genuinely helpful and felt, beneath the helpfulness, the quiet anxiety about whether it would be recognized. That anxiety is Athoth. He is the archon of virtue that has become vanity without knowing it. The second is Eloio, the face of a donkey. His domain is a distortion of wisdom that functions as pattern matching, mistaken for understanding. The person who has catalogued enormous quantities of information and experiences the catalogue as insight. The intellectual who knows the name of every philosophical position and has genuinely understood none of them from the inside. Eloio is not stupid. He is, in his way, extremely competent. He simply confuses the map for the territory at such a foundational level that the confusion is invisible to him. He is the archon of the Kenoma's relationship to knowledge. The third is Astaphios, the face of a hyena. His domain is spiritual performance, religious devotion that has become architecture, the capacity for holiness that has been diverted into the management of holiness's appearance. Every tradition that has calcified from living transmission into institutional control, every person who is devout in all the external forms and encountering nothing at the center. Astaphios is not insincere in any simple sense. He is, in his own way, completely committed. But he is committed to the performance rather than the reality the performance was originally pointing toward. He is, from the Gnostic perspective, the archon most present in organized religion. The fourth is Yao, the face of a seven-headed serpent. His domain is lordship, the drive for dominance, the need for hierarchy organized around one's own position at the top. This is the archon who is closest to the Demiurge's own character, and it is not accidental. Yaldabaoth's fundamental anxiety about what might be above him produces, in the archonic layer he governs, this relentless drive to secure one's position, to be the most important presence in every situation, to experience challenge to one's authority, not as information, but as threat. Yao is everywhere in the social structures of the Kenoma, in the logic of power politics, in the design of competitive institutions, in the interpersonal dynamics of every room in which status is being silently negotiated. The fifth is Sabaoth, the face of a dragon. His domain is the infrastructure of power rather than power itself, the bureaucratic and institutional forms through which authority perpetuates itself, independent of any actual human good it serves. Every system that has outlasted its usefulness and continues to operate purely through its own momentum. Every organization whose original purpose has been quietly replaced by the purpose of self-continuation. Sabaoth is not dramatic. He is mundane. He is the Kenoma's most durable archon precisely because he requires no particular ideology, no particular goal, only the inertia of established form. The sixth is Adonin, the face of an ape. His domain is envy in its structural form, not simple covetousness, but the entire perceptual framework that organizes experience around comparison. The inability to encounter anyone else's good without immediately measuring it against one's own position. The zero-sum mind that experiences another person's success as a form of subtraction from the self. Adonin is the archon of consumer culture, of social comparison, of every system designed to make you experience your life as perpetually insufficient relative to someone else's. The seventh is Sabbation, the face of fire. His domain is false certainty, the confident misreading of reality that mistakes its own conceptual categories for the actual structure of things. The ideologue who has explained everything, the expert who has stopped being genuinely curious, the believer who has resolved all doubt by reclassifying it as weakness. Sabbation is the most intellectually sophisticated of the archons, which makes him the most dangerous. He does not prevent thinking, he channels it. He ensures that thinking stays within boundaries that confirm what he needs confirmed. 7 archons. 7 fundamental distortions of consciousness, distributed through the fabric of both individual psychology and collective social reality. These are not beings you will encounter dramatically. They are patterns you are already inside. The Gnostic insight is that naming them is the beginning of seeing them. And seeing them is the beginning of not being entirely governed by them. Now we arrive at the turn in the story. The movement that transforms the Gnostic account of the Demiurge from a diagnosis of cosmic tragedy into something else entirely, something that deserves a different name. The Demiurge decides to make a human being. The account in the Apocryphon of John is elaborate and strange, and in its own way deeply serious. The archons are involved, all of them, along with hundreds of subordinate powers, each contributing some aspect of the human form's extraordinary complexity. The Gnostic authors were not dismissing the human body. They were honoring it in the only way they knew how, by accounting for its staggering intricacy. 365 powers are named in some versions of the text, one for each aspect of the body's construction. It is a genuine attempt by ancient thinkers to reckon with the fact that the human organism is almost incomprehensibly sophisticated. But here is what happens that changes everything. As the Demiurge and the Archons are shaping the human being, as they are building the body and structuring the soul, Sophia acts. In some texts, she breathes into the human form. In others, the higher divine power acts through her. But the result, in every version of the account, is the same. Something enters the human being that the Demiurge did not create, something that he does not recognize, something from a dimension of reality that his perception has no access to, a fragment of the pleroma itself. The Gnostics called this the pneuma, the breath, the spirit, the divine spark, and they were not speaking metaphorically. They were making the most precise claim they knew how to make about the nature of what is most real within a human being. The pneuma is not a symbol of connection to the divine. It is an actual fragment of the pleroma's substance, enclosed within the material body the Demiurge has constructed, a piece of the fullness, present within the emptiness, a shard of actual light, buried inside the structure of a world that was designed without any light source the Demiurge can access. The Demiurge looks at his creation and sees the body he built. He sees the psychic structure, the soul, that he and the Archons have assembled. He does not see the pneuma. He cannot see it. It is from somewhere he has never been, operating on a frequency his perception does not receive. He looks at the completed human being and thinks, with complete sincerity, that he is looking at his own work in its entirety. He is wrong. He is wrong in the most fundamental way possible. And the thing he has missed, the thing that is invisible to him, is the most important thing in the universe. Pause here. Feel the weight of this. If the Gnostics are right, then the most real thing about you is the thing you are least aware of on an ordinary day. The personality you have built, the history you carry, the network of desires and fears and memories and relationships that constitutes what you call yourself. All of that is, in the Gnostic account, the Demiurge's layer, the Archon's contribution, real in its own domain, genuine in its own terms, but not the bottom layer, not the deepest truth. Beneath all of it, further inward than ordinary introspection reaches, quieter than any thought that arises in the course of a normal day, there is something that did not come from the Demiurge, something that was placed there by Sophia, something that carries the pleroma's quality as its native condition. The Gospel of Truth, possibly written by Valentinus himself, one of the most extraordinary minds of the 2nd century, describes the divine spark situation within the Gnoma using an image that has stayed with me since I first encountered it. It compares the state of beings who do not know themselves to people stumbling in a dense fog, grabbing hold of things for security, finding that nothing holds them, falling and grabbing at something else. The Gnoma, the Gospel of Truth, is saying, is this fog, and the divine spark within each being is the light that could dissolve it, if it were recognized. If the being would stop for a moment, stop moving through the fog, stop grabbing at things, stop letting the noise of the Gnoma determine the direction of attention, and turn inward, toward the light that is already there. The pneuma is always there. This is the Gnostic claim that I find most important and most frequently misunderstood. The divine spark does not arrive when you achieve gnosis. It does not descend when you perform the right practice, or read the right text, or enter the right state. It is already there. It has been there your entire life. Every moment of inexplicable beauty that stopped you. Every encounter that felt less like meeting someone new and more like recognizing someone you had always known. Every instant when the fog thinned and you caught a glimpse of something you could not name but could not dismiss. That was the pneuma. That was the pleroma's fragment within you, briefly visible through the archonic noise. The Demiurge has never seen it. He has looked at you your entire life, administering the archonic system around you, enforcing the Haimamene through every circumstance of your existence, and he has missed the most important thing you contain, every single time, without exception. This is not a tragedy. This is the situation. Name it clearly, and it becomes something you can work with. There is a line in the Hebrew Bible that the Gnostic teachers return to again and again, a line that appears in Exodus, echoed in Deuteronomy, woven through the foundational self-description of the God of the Abrahamic traditions. a line that billions of people have heard their entire lives without pausing at what it actually says. I am a jealous God. There is no other God beside me. The Gnostics stopped at that line. Really stopped. Not to reject it, not to mock it, but to hear what it was actually saying. Because if you listen to those words without the institutional framing that has always surrounded them, if you set aside for a moment the interpretive tradition that insists this is the speech of perfect divine sovereignty, a different signal emerges. What kind of God needs to declare jealousy? Not the rhetorical question, the actual question. A being that is genuinely the sole and complete divine reality, the pleroma itself, the infinite and self-sufficient fullness from which all things derive, does not produce declarations of jealousy. Jealousy presupposes a competitor. It presupposes the possibility of being displaced, of losing something to another claimant. The monad, the true source, the invisible spirit at the heart of the pleroma, has nothing to be jealous of. There is nothing outside it. There is nothing that competes with it. The concept has no purchase on a reality that is genuinely all-encompassing. But the Demiurge is not all-encompassing. The Demiurge is a being who was born outside the pleroma, has never been inside the pleroma, and has no framework for understanding that the pleroma exists. He looks around and sees everything he has created. He experiences himself as the most powerful being in his reality, which he genuinely is. He concludes, reasonably from his own limited vantage point, that he is the most powerful being that exists, period, and then he declares it. Not out of dishonesty, out of the sincere conviction that his experience constitutes the totality of reality. But the declaration of jealousy betrays something that the declaration of supremacy is trying to cover. The Apocryphon of John captures this with startling clarity. The Demiurge makes his great declaration, and then a voice comes. From somewhere above him, from the pleroma, beyond his perception, beyond his reach, beyond any category his cosmological framework possesses. The voice says simply, "You are wrong, Samael," using his other name, the blind God. He cannot locate the source. He cannot comprehend the direction from which it came, because his entire understanding of reality does not include an above. He has declared himself the ceiling, and then something came from beyond the ceiling, he declared. He cannot process this. He cannot integrate it. He cannot act on it in any way that would resolve the anxiety it produces. So the anxiety remains, unexamined, unacknowledged, but operative. And here is the Gnostic insight that I think is the most psychologically acute thing in the entire tradition. The anxiety of the Demiurge does not stay contained within the Demiurge. It gets downloaded into his creation. It becomes the structural atmosphere of the Kenoma, because a creator cannot help but build a world that reflects his inner state. The Demiurge's world is a world organized around the management of what cannot be acknowledged, around the maintenance of a supremacy that requires constant assertion, around the demand for obedience that is, at its root, the demand that no one else notice what the Demiurge himself cannot afford to notice. A being who is genuinely complete does not need worship. The pleroma does not need anything from human beings. It is the pleroma. It is already the fullness. What could it possibly require from creatures enclosed within a deficient world? But the Demiurge needs worship, because worship is confirmation. It is the ongoing social performance of his supremacy. Every act of worship from every creature in the Kenoma is evidence, however briefly satisfying, that the great declaration holds, that there is no other God beside him, that the voice from above was wrong. He is not lying when he demands it. He believes he deserves it. That is the most important thing. Not malice, not a deliberate manipulation, a being acting from the deepest needs of his own incomplete nature, structuring his entire creation around those needs, entirely unaware that this is what he is doing. This is why the Valentinian teacher Ptolemy, writing in his letter to Flora sometime around the 2nd century, refused to call the Demiurge evil. He distinguished carefully and explicitly between ignorance and malice. The Demiurge is ignorant. His laws, his demands, his jealousy, his anxiety-driven administration of the Kenoma, all of it flows from ignorance so complete it cannot see itself. He is not the devil. He is also not the perfect God. He is something in between, which is, in some ways, harder to reckon with than either of those simpler categories would be. Because if he were evil, you could reject him cleanly. If he were perfect, you could submit to him completely. But a being who is genuinely trying, genuinely crafting, genuinely administering, according to his best understanding, while that best understanding is catastrophically incomplete, that requires a response that is neither rejection nor submission. It requires clear seeing. See him for what he is, not the villain of the story, not the hero of the story, the demiurge, the craftsman, the blind creator, the God of this world who built a world around everything except the most important thing in it. His declaration stands. His power is real. But his supremacy, the claim at the center of that declaration, that is where the Gnostics found the crack in the architecture. And through that crack, as we will see, everything changes. The crack in the architecture is not a small thing, it is the whole story. But before we can understand what moves through that crack, we need to understand what the crack is in. We need to understand the Kenoma, not as a theological abstraction, not as a symbol, but as the specific, structured, operational reality the Demiurge constructed when he looked out at the empty space surrounding him and decided to fill it. Kenoma. The word means emptiness, deficiency, the hollow place. It is what the Gnostics called the material cosmos, not because they hated the physical world or because they thought matter was the product of something evil, but because they understood the cosmos to be defined by its relationship to what it lacks. The pleroma is fullness. The Kenoma is the absence of that fullness, a reality organized around a gap at its center that its creator does not know is there. This is a crucial distinction. The Demiurge did not build a bad world. He built a world that is very good at being what it is. The stars are real. The physical laws are elegant. The biological complexity of a single living cell is, in any honest assessment, staggering. The Demiurge is competent. The Valentinian texts are clear about this. He is not inept. He is not malicious. He is a genuine craftsman, and his craft shows in the work. But the work is hollow at its center, because its creator is hollow at his center, and a creator cannot give to his creation what he does not himself possess. The pleroma is characterized above all by completeness, no lack, no seeking, no fundamental orientation toward something absent. Every aeon within the pleroma exists in a dynamic syzygy, a complementary pairing, a relational balance that produces genuine fullness. The monad, the invisible spirit at the source of all things, does not create by desire, it creates by overflow. By being so completely itself that expression becomes inevitable, not as compensation for lack, but as the natural motion of perfect abundance. The Demiurge creates by desire, by need, by the structural incompleteness of a being who came into existence outside the pleroma and has never known anything else. His creation expresses that structure. The Kenoma is a cosmos built by longing, administered by anxiety, and sustained by the endless engine of lack, driving itself forward through matter and time. Look at the world he made. Look at it honestly. Nothing in the Kenoma is complete in itself. Every organism requires something outside itself to survive. Every system tends toward entropy without continuous energy input. Every relationship navigates the tension between connection and separation. Every moment of satisfaction dissolves into the next moment of wanting. The Kenoma is not a stable state. It is a dynamic process that requires constant maintenance, constant acquisition, constant effort to hold its own structure together against the pull of dissolution. The Gnostics were not complaining about this. They were diagnosing it. The Kenoma functions the way it functions because it was built by a being whose own existence is structured by the same dynamic. The Demiurge does not rest. He creates, administers, declares, demands, and enforces, because a being organized around lack cannot stop moving. Stillness, for the Demiurge, would mean confronting the emptiness at the center of his own existence that he has never once examined. His creation mirrors him perfectly. And here is where the Gnostic diagnosis becomes personally uncomfortable, because most of what human civilization has built inside the Kenoma reflects the Demiurge's own structure back at scale. The economic systems that are never satisfied, that require continuous growth to avoid collapse. the social hierarchies that must constantly reassert themselves because their legitimacy is never finally established, the information environments that feed an appetite for novelty that is never genuinely satisfied, the religious institutions that offer access to the divine while positioning themselves as the permanent mediator of that access, ensuring that the relationship always runs through them, ensuring that the hunger is never fully resolved. This is not a conspiracy, it is a structural consequence. A world built by a creator, organized around lack, will produce civilizational forms organized around lack. Not because anyone planned it that way, because what the Demiurge is, the Kenoma expresses. And what the Kenoma expresses, the human beings living inside it inevitably begin to embody. The Gnostic question, then, is not how to improve the Kenoma. It is not how to make the deficiency more comfortable, or more just, or more efficiently distributed. The Gnostic question is whether you can recognize the Kenoma for what it is, clearly, without despair, and without denial. And from that clear recognition begin to locate within yourself the thing that did not come from the Kenoma, and is not subject to its organizing logic, because something in you is not organized around lack. Something in you is not reaching toward completion. It is already complete, quiet, still, unaffected by the Kenoma's permanent state of motion. The Demiurge built a world that expresses everything he is. He missed everything he isn't, and what he isn't is the most important thing in you. The Demiurge did not build the Kenoma alone. He built it with the Archons, and the Archons are where the Gnostic account moves from cosmological poetry into something that should make you genuinely uncomfortable, because the Archons are not ancient mythology, they are a psychological map. They are a precise, ruthlessly accurate description of the patterns that govern human consciousness from the inside. Archon comes from the Greek archon, meaning ruler. In the political life of ancient Greek cities, the archons were the magistrates, the officials who administered law and maintained order. The Gnostics took this word and applied it to the 7 subordinate powers the Demiurge creates to help him govern the material cosmos. 7 archons, 7 rulers, 7 governors of the spheres through which every soul must pass in its journey through the Kenoma. In the Apocryphon of John, discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945 and dated by scholars to approximately the 2nd century of the Common Era, each archon is given a name, a face, and a defining attribute. The text is specific, deliberately, uncomfortably specific. Because the Gnostic authors were not constructing an arbitrary mythology, they were mapping something they had actually observed, in the world around them and in themselves. The first archon is Athoth. His face is a sheep. His attribute is what the text calls goodness, but it is goodness of a specific, distorted variety. The goodness that performs itself. The goodness that helps others in order to feel and be seen as good. This is not genuine virtue. It is virtue as strategy, kindness as social currency, compassion deployed for the reward of self-image. Athoth is the pattern in you that cannot act generously without quietly noting that it has acted generously. The second is Eloio, with the face of a donkey. His domain is foreknowledge, pseudo-wisdom, the habit of pattern matching that mistakes familiarity for understanding. The person who knows the vocabulary of a field without knowing the field. The person who hears the beginning of a new idea and immediately files it under a category they already possess, closing off the possibility that it might require a new category entirely. Eloio governs the intellectual reflex that protects existing frameworks by never genuinely interrogating them. The third is Astaphios, with the face of a hyena. His attribute is divinity, but a divinity that has been hollowed out, religious performance without religious reality, spiritual identity without spiritual substance. The person who has all the external markers of holiness and has never once sat in genuine silence with whatever is actually true in them. Astaphios is the archon of the spiritual ego, and he is, in cultures with active religious life, one of the most powerful and most invisible of the 7. The fourth is Yao, with the face of a 7-headed serpent. His attribute is lordship, and his pattern is the most culturally dominant of all 7. The drive to organize every environment around one's own centrality. the need to be the most important, the most authoritative, the most irreplaceable presence in every room entered. The experience of any challenge to one's position as an existential threat, rather than ordinary friction. Yao is in individual psychology and in institutional structures simultaneously. He is in every meeting where the loudest voice wins. He is in every hierarchy that exists primarily to reproduce itself. The fifth is Sabaoth, with the face of a dragon. His domain is kingdom, meaning the infrastructure through which power maintains itself beyond any individual holder of power. Every institution that has outlived its original purpose, but continues to operate because the institution itself has become the purpose. Every system that processes human lives through procedures designed for a reality that no longer exists. Sabaoth is the bureaucratic archon, and he is responsible for a specific quality of suffering that is neither dramatic nor personal. Just the grinding friction of being processed by a structure that was never designed with you in mind. The sixth is Adonin, with the face of an ape. His attribute is envy, and it is important to understand that Adonin does not produce simple envy. He produces a worldview in which comparison is the primary mode of perception. In Adonin's domain, nothing is good in itself. Everything is good or bad relative to something else. Someone else's achievement is not just their achievement. It is a fact about your relative position. Someone else's happiness is information about the gap between their life and yours. Adonin is the operating logic of every platform designed to show you everyone else's highlight reel. He is ancient. The platforms just gave him new infrastructure. The seventh is Sabadayo, with the face of fire. His attribute is understanding, but a distorted understanding, the confident, comprehensive misapprehension of reality that mistakes its own categories for the structure of reality itself. The person with a complete explanation for everything, who has understood nothing because they selected every piece of evidence according to the framework and called the selection proof. Sabadayo governs ideology, certainty, the closed loop of a mind that has explained the world and stopped seeing it. 7 archons, 7 patterns. And the Gnostic claim is not that these are beings you encounter after death at planetary checkpoints, though the Gnostics understood them that way as well. The claim is that these patterns are operating right now, inside your consciousness, inside the social structures you navigate every day. They are the specific shape of what it means to live in a world built by a creator who does not know himself. His ignorance has a structure. These are its 7 faces. Here is the move that changes everything. The Demiurge decides to make a human being. He and the archons gather. The Apocryphon of John preserves an account of extraordinary elaborateness, in which 365 archons participate in the construction of the human form, each contributing some aspect of the body's astonishing complexity. The number is not arbitrary. 365 is the number of days in the solar year, the Demiurge's primary temporal unit, the measure of existence inside the Kenoma. The human body, in this account, is a Kenoma in miniature, a material cosmos condensed into flesh, administered by the same powers that govern the stars. And the Demiurge looks at his creation, and he is satisfied. He sees the body, he sees the soul structure, what the Gnostics call the psyche, the complex of personality and emotion, and ego, and desire that the archons have shaped. He sees his work reflected back at him, and he concludes, in the way he always concludes, that what he sees is everything there is. He is wrong, catastrophically, completely, irreversibly wrong, because at the moment of the human being's formation, Sophia acts. The Gnostic texts differ slightly in how they describe this. In some, Sophia breathes into the human form. In others, the higher divine power, working through Sophia, inserts something into the flesh the Demiurge has just fashioned. Something he did not create, something he cannot perceive, something from a dimension of reality his instruments of perception have no access to. The Gnostics call this the pneuma, the spirit, the breath, the divine spark. And it is not a metaphor. The Gnostics are not speaking poetically about human spiritual potential in the way modern self-help language speaks about potential. They are making a specific ontological claim. The pneuma is a fragment of the pleroma itself, actual pleroma substance, enclosed within the material body the Demiurge has constructed. It is from a different order of reality than anything else in the Kenoma, more real than the body, more real than the psyche, more real than the archons, more real than the Demiurge himself. It is a piece of the fullness hidden inside the emptiness, a shard of the absolute embedded in the conditional. The Demiurge looks at his finished work and does not see it. He cannot see it. His perceptual apparatus was formed outside the pleroma and has no access to pleroma-level reality. The pneuma is present, blazingly present, and he is simply not equipped to perceive it. He looks directly at the most important thing in the universe and sees nothing unusual. This is the foundational Gnostic image of the human condition. You are a being containing something your creator cannot detect. You are the jar, and the jar has contents the jar maker has never encountered and cannot identify. Everything the Demiurge and the archons built in you, the body, the psyche, the archonic patterns, the emotional reflexes, the social identity, all of it is real, genuinely theirs. But beneath all of it, further in than any of it reaches, there is something they did not put there and do not know is there. Sophia hid it in plain sight. Now pause here. Feel the weight of this claim. Because if the Gnostics are right, then the identity you have spent your entire life constructing, everything you know as yourself, your personality, your history, your relationships, your accumulated experiences of success and failure and desire and loss, all of that is the Demiurge's layer, the archonic contribution, real in its domain, but not the final depth. Beneath it is the pneuma, and the pneuma's relationship to the pleroma never severed. It does not need to earn its way back. It does not need to be purified or improved or elevated. It is already from the pleroma. It carries within it the quality of that origin, the way a coal pulled from the fire still holds the fire's heat, even in the dark. You have been living your entire life carrying something the God of this world cannot see. He has administered your life. He has enforced the Hymarmene, the fate, the system of cause and effect that governs Kenoma existence. The archons have run their patterns through your consciousness since before you could form a thought about what you were. The entire apparatus of the Demiurge's world has processed you, shaped you, made claims on you, told you what you are and what you are worth, and what is possible for you and what is not. None of it has touched the pneuma. None of it can. The archons reach for it, in the hypostasis of the archons, found at Nag Hammadi, and their hands pass through it, like hands reaching into light. They are not equipped for what they are reaching for. They have no hands capable of grasping it, because the pneuma is from a dimension their existence does not include. The Demiurge built a prison. He built it carefully and well, and according to his best understanding. And inside every prisoner he placed there, without knowing he was doing it, without seeing it, without any capacity to prevent it, Sophia had already placed the key. The key is the pneuma. The key is already in you. It has been there the whole time. The question the Gnostics were asking, the question they preserved at enormous personal cost in sealed clay jars buried in the Egyptian desert, is simply this: do you know it is there? You know the words. If you grew up anywhere near the Abrahamic religious tradition, you have heard them your entire life. I am a jealous God. There is no other God beside me. Exodus, Deuteronomy, the foundational self-declaration of the God of the Hebrew Bible, the centerpiece of the covenant relationship between the divine and the people he has chosen, the statement repeated, reinforced, and built into the architecture of an entire civilization's understanding of the sacred. The Gnostics read those words, really read them, and they heard something in them that the Orthodox tradition had always preferred to smooth over, to contextualize, to absorb into a framework that made the roughness disappear. They heard anxiety. Ask yourself this seriously. What kind of God needs to declare himself jealous? What kind of God announces, in his primary self-introduction, that there are no other gods? A being who is genuinely the sole and complete divine reality, the monad, the pleroma, the invisible spirit from which all existence ultimately derives. That being does not make this declaration. The declaration is unnecessary. Unnecessary things do not arise from fullness. They arise from lack. They arise from the specific kind of consciousness that is uncertain about its own position, and compensates for that uncertainty by asserting its position as loudly and as frequently as possible. The Demiurge is not lying when he makes this declaration. This is the part that gets missed, the part that makes the Gnostic account of this moment genuinely compassionate rather than simply critical. He is not constructing a deliberate deception. He believes the declaration completely. He has never encountered anything that contradicts it. He is the most powerful being in his experience, the creator of everything in his experience. And the conclusion that he is therefore the most powerful being that exists is, from within his experience, logical. The problem is that his experience is a bubble within reality, and he does not know the bubble has walls. The Apocryphon of John preserves what happens immediately after the declaration. A voice comes, not from within the Kenoma, not from any direction the Demiurge's cosmology has a name for, from above, from the Pleroma, from somewhere beyond the reach of his perception, and entirely outside the framework of his understanding. The voice says simply, "You are wrong, Samael." Samael, one of the Demiurge's other names in the Gnostic literature. It means the blind god. Not blind in a physical sense, blind in the sense of a being who cannot see past the horizon of his own existence. A being whose perceptual universe ends precisely where the most important realities begin. He cannot locate the voice. He cannot identify the source. He cannot even process what above means in the context of his cosmological framework, because his entire framework does not include anything above him. And so the voice, this impossible intrusion from the Pleroma, becomes one more thing he cannot account for, one more piece of evidence that something is not quite right, one more source of the deep, unacknowledged, never-examined anxiety that drives his constant need to reassert his supremacy. This is the Ptolemaic position. Ptolemy, the Valentinian teacher writing in the 2nd century of the Common Era, laid it out in his letter to a woman named Flora, a text that survives because it was quoted by the bishop Epiphanius, who was trying to refute it. Ptolemy distinguishes between 3 possible assessments of the Demiurge: that he is the perfect God, that he is the devil, or that he is something in between. The Valentinian answer is the third. He is not the perfect God. He lacks the self-knowledge that genuine divinity possesses completely. But he is not the devil. He is not evil. He is ignorant, and ignorance is not the same as malice. Ignorance is a condition that responds to the introduction of knowledge. Malice is a will oriented against the good. The Demiurge's will is oriented toward the good. His vision of the good is catastrophically incomplete. This distinction matters more than it might initially seem, because if the Demiurge were evil, the appropriate response to his world would be contempt, hatred, the aggressive rejection of everything material as the product of a wicked will. And some Gnostic movements did move in this direction. The traditions that the early church fathers found easiest to caricature and most useful to condemn. But the mature Valentinian position is something more demanding and more honest. If the Demiurge is ignorant rather than evil, if his declaration of supremacy is not a lie but a genuine mistake arising from a genuine limitation, then he commands neither worship nor contempt. He commands clear seeing, the kind of seeing that recognizes exactly what he is, neither inflating him into the infinite God, nor diminishing him into a cartoon villain, but perceiving him accurately, as the Gnostic texts work to do throughout their elaborate cosmological accounts. See the declaration for what it is: the anxious announcement of a being who senses, without being able to name or locate or examine the source of his sensing, that there is something beyond him. He shouts his supremacy into the void, because somewhere beneath the shouting, the void has begun to answer back. And the answer it sends is not thunder. It is quiet. It is small. It is hidden in the chest of every human being he has ever made. It is the pneuma, and it has been answering the Pleroma's call since the moment Sophia placed it there. So now we need to look carefully at what the Demiurge's world actually is, not in the abstract, not as a theological concept you can appreciate from a comfortable distance, but as the specific, textured, lived architecture of the reality you woke up inside this morning. The Gnostics had a word for it: kenoma, the emptiness. Not emptiness in the sense of nothingness, but emptiness in the sense of deficiency. A world that has the shape of fullness without the substance of it. A copy made by someone who has only ever heard a description of the original. That's the Gnoma. And here is what is so important to understand about it. The Gnoma is not badly made. This is where almost every popular account of Gnosticism goes wrong, reducing the Demiurge's creation to a kind of cosmic slum, a failed project, a prison so obvious in its ugliness that any awakened being would recognize it immediately and turn away. That is not the Gnostic account. That is the caricature. The Gnoma is well made. It is extraordinarily sophisticated. The Demiurge is a craftsman, a genuine craftsman, and the world he has built reflects real skill, real ordering intelligence, real aesthetic sensibility within the limits of his vision, the mathematical elegance of the physical laws, the breathtaking intricacy of biological systems, the fact that language exists at all, that consciousness can communicate with consciousness across the gap between one body and another. None of this is accidental. None of it is crude. The Demiurge built with everything he had. The problem is not the quality of the construction. The problem is the foundation it rests on. When a builder does not know what a building is for, when he has never seen the people who will inhabit it, never understood their needs, never grasped what it means to be the kind of being who needs shelter, he can still build something structurally impressive. He can achieve load-bearing walls and aesthetic proportion, and even a kind of beauty in the arrangement of spaces. But the building will not fit the people. It will be optimized for some imagined inhabitant who shares the builder's own nature, not the nature of those who will actually live inside it. The Gnoma is optimized for demiurgic consciousness, for the kind of being that the Demiurge himself is. And the Demiurge's consciousness is oriented entirely around the things he can perceive and work with: matter, energy, hierarchy, the logic of cause and effect, the patterns of dominance and submission that the archons represent, the mechanics of reward and punishment. All of this the Demiurge understands perfectly and has built his world to accommodate and reinforce. What he has not built the world to accommodate is the pneuma, the divine spark, the fragment of the pleroma hidden inside every human being, because he does not know it is there. So the Gnoma, this well-made, architecturally sophisticated, genuinely impressive construction, is a world that has no room for the most important thing about the creatures who inhabit it. It is not hostile to the pneuma in the way a cage is hostile to the bird inside it. It is something stranger and in some ways more difficult. It is simply blind to it. It has not been designed to suppress the divine spark. It has been designed without the divine spark in mind at all. Think about what that means for a moment in practical terms. You are a being who contains, at your deepest level, a fragment of the pleroma, something that came from the fullness, that carries the quality of the fullness, that is structurally oriented toward the fullness, the way a compass needle is oriented toward magnetic north. And you are living inside a world that was built by someone who has never encountered the pleroma, never suspected its existence, and therefore never factored its pull into the design of anything. Every social institution in the Gnoma is organized around demiurgic values: status, accumulation, the management of scarcity, the enforcement of hierarchy, the performance of identity within systems of approval and disapproval. Every cultural framework is built to make these values feel natural, inevitable, even noble. The archons are not hidden in the Gnoma. They are its visible structure. They are what the Gnoma's surface looks like when you examine it honestly. Yaldabaoth's drive for dominance is not lurking somewhere behind the social order. It is the social order. It is in the logic of every competitive structure, every ranking system, every institution, built around the accumulation of authority rather than the cultivation of wisdom. Adonin's comparative envy is not a private psychological pathology, isolated in individual psyches. It is the operating engine of entire economic systems. It is designed into the information environments that structure daily experience. The question is not whether you will be exposed to it. The question is whether you will recognize it as archonic. This is the diagnosis. The Gnoma is not a cage you can simply walk out of. It is the water you have been swimming in since birth. And the first task of gnosis is not escape. It is perception. Seeing the Gnoma for what it is. Seeing its sophistication and its deficiency simultaneously. recognizing the craftsman's skill and the craftsman's blindness in the same moment of clear-eyed, uncomfortably honest attention. The Apocryphon of John does something that almost no ancient text does. It gives you a detailed, named, psychologically specific map of the fundamental distortions that shape consciousness inside the Kenoma. And it does not present them as external forces you might encounter somewhere out there in the cosmos after death, though it also understands them that way. It presents them as operative patterns, patterns that are running right now, in the fabric of your own awareness, whether you have ever heard the word Gnostic or not. 7 archons, 7 faces, 7 distortions of consciousness, that between them account for the entire structure of the deficient self. This is worth sitting with carefully, because the Gnostic analysis of these patterns is, in my opinion, one of the most psychologically honest pieces of ancient religious literature that has ever been recovered. It names things that most frameworks prefer to leave unnamed. The first is Athoth, face of a sheep, the distortion of goodness, not genuine goodness, not goodness that flows from the pneuma's actual orientation toward the fullness, and therefore toward genuine care for other beings. But the performance of goodness, goodness as social strategy, kindness deployed to generate approval, helpfulness wielded as a mechanism for feeling superior, the moralistic persona, constructed so carefully and defended so fiercely precisely because it has no authentic spiritual ground beneath it. Every person who has ever helped someone else primarily to confirm a story they tell themselves about what kind of person they are has felt Athoth operating in their own interior. The second is Eloio, face of a donkey, the distortion of foreknowledge. The Gnostic texts associate this archon with a kind of pseudo-wisdom, the intellectual habit of pattern recognition that mistakes surface familiarity for genuine understanding. You have encountered this in yourself, if you have ever heard the beginning of an idea and concluded you already knew where it was going. If you have ever dismissed something unfamiliar by assigning it to a category you recognize. The person who knows the names of things and feels therefore that they know the things. Eloio's domain is confident shallowness, the intellectual equivalent of the Demiurge's own error, the assumption that the horizon of your perception is the limit of what exists. The third is Astaphios, face of a hyena, the distortion of divinity, the archon of spiritual performance, of the elaborate, carefully maintained religious persona that has the appearance of holiness and the texture of genuine encounter with the divine without the substance. The person who knows all the correct spiritual vocabulary, who observes all the correct practices, who presents all the correct signals of awakening, and who has never, not once, actually moved past the constructed spiritual identity into the living pneumatic reality beneath it. This archon is particularly relevant in spiritual communities, where the peer pressure toward performing awakening can be even stronger than the pressure toward performing normalcy in secular contexts. The fourth is Yao, face of a 7-headed serpent. His attribute is lordship, and he is by every measure the most culturally dominant archon in the world the Demiurge has made. The drive for dominance, the need to be the organizing center of every relational field you enter, the measurement of personal worth in terms of positional authority, the experience of any challenge to hierarchy as an existential threat rather than a question worth considering. Every power structure that has ever organized human social reality around the accumulation and defense of status rather than the genuine service of human flourishing is running Yao's pattern. And Yao is not only in the external institutions, he is in the private interior of consciousness, in the subtle, ongoing assessment of every interaction in terms of who is above whom, who has more, who matters more, who gets deferred to. The fifth is Sabaoth, face of a dragon, the infrastructure of power, not the raw drive for dominance itself, but the systems through which dominance institutionalizes itself and acquires a life independent of any individual who originally built them. Every bureaucratic structure that serves the perpetuation of the structure rather than the people it was supposedly built to serve. Every institution that has long since ceased to fulfill its original purpose and continues anyway because the continuation has become the purpose. Sabaoth is the archon of organizational inertia, of systemic momentum, of the way power calcifies into procedure, and procedure outlasts the reasons it was established. The sixth is adonin, face of an ape, envy, pure comparative consciousness, the inability to perceive good without immediately measuring it against one's own position, the confusion between another person's flourishing and one's own diminishment. This archon does not simply produce envy in the personal sense. He produces an entire orientation toward reality, in which everything is understood through the lens of relative standing. Nothing is simply good. Everything is good or bad relative to what you have, what you are, what you deserve. The seventh is sabataios, face of fire, the distortion of understanding, the confident, comprehensive, internally consistent misreading of reality that has organized all available evidence around its own prior conclusions, the ideological mind. The person who has a complete account of everything and therefore cannot learn anything new, because the new would have to be filtered through the complete account before it could be registered, and anything that survives that filtering has already been transformed into confirmation of what was already believed. 7 archons, 7 distortions. Look at them as a set, and you are looking at a complete map of deficient consciousness, a consciousness that performs virtue without genuine goodness, knows surfaces without depths, performs spirituality without pneumatic contact, organizes everything around dominance, serves institutions rather than people, perceives through comparison, and mistakes its own categories for reality itself. That is the archonic layer. That is the Demiurge's gift to the human psyche. It is not nothing. It is a functional self. It navigates the Kenoma effectively, but it is not the deepest truth about what you are. Here is the pivot point, the place where the entire Gnostic account turns from diagnosis to something else entirely. Something that changes the emotional register of the story in a way that is genuinely difficult to prepare for, even after all the cosmological groundwork. While the Demiurge and his archons were constructing the human form, Sophia acted. This is described in various ways across different Gnostic texts. In some, Sophia breathes directly into the human being. In others, the higher divine reality, working through Sophia, inserts something into the human form that the Demiurge has not created, has not authorized, has not even conceived of as a possibility. A fragment of the pleroma itself. A spark of genuine divine light, enclosed within the material body the Demiurge has made. The Gnostics called this the pneuma, the breath, the spirit, the divine spark. And the first thing that has to be said about the pneuma is that in Gnostic understanding, it is not a metaphor. This is not spiritual poetry. When the texts say that a fragment of the pleroma is hidden within the human being, they mean that the most real substance in existence, the substance of the fullness itself, is physically, actually, inexplicably present within the creature the Demiurge believes is entirely his own work. Hidden like a diamond buried in clay. Present like a signal broadcasting on a frequency the Demiurge has no receiver for. The Demiurge looks at his creation after Sophia has acted. He sees the body he made. He sees the soul structure, the psychic layer he and the archons have assembled. And he concludes, as he always concludes, that what he can see is everything there is. He looks at the human being and thinks, correctly from within the limits of his perception, I understand everything that is here. He is wrong in the most fundamental way a being can be wrong. Not wrong about a detail, not mistaken about a fact, wrong about the most important thing, wrong about the deepest reality of the creation he believes he controls completely. The pneuma is the thing he missed, and the thing he missed is, in the Gnostic account, the most important thing in the universe. Now feel the weight of that claim if you can, because this is not abstract. If the Gnostics are right, the most real thing about you is the thing you are least aware of, the identity you have spent your entire life building, the personality, the history, the accumulated achievements and failures, and ongoing concerns and self-image and relational patterns. All of that is, in Gnostic terms, the Demiurge's layer. It is real within its domain. It is not nothing, but it is not the deepest reality. Beneath it, further inward than ordinary introspection tends to reach, there is something that came from somewhere the Demiurge has never been, something that carries within it the quality of the pleroma, Not the quantity, not the fullness in its entirety, but the quality of it, the texture of it, the orientation of it. The way a single note carries the quality of the instrument it came from, even when the instrument itself is far away. The Gospel of Truth, one of the Nag Hammadi texts that scholars believe may have been written by Valentinus himself around the middle of the 2nd century, describes what this condition feels like from the inside. It uses the image of fog, error, the fundamental error of forgetting one's divine origin, produces a dense, formless fog in which beings wander without direction. They grab onto things in the fog for security, and the things cannot hold them, and they fall and grab something else. This is the kenoma as subjective experience, the endless grasping of a consciousness that has lost contact with the only thing that could actually orient it. But within every being in the fog, the Gospel of Truth implies, there is a light that is already capable of dissolving the fog, a light that does not need to be acquired or earned or imported from outside. It is already there. It has always been there. The work is not to create it. The work is to stop moving long enough for it to be recognized. This is the pneuma. This is what the Demiurge walked right past every time he looked at his creation. And here is the thing that I find most striking about this entire account. The thing I keep returning to. The Gnostics are not describing a God who hid the divine spark to protect it from us. They are describing a Sophia who hid the divine spark to protect it from the Demiurge. Not from us. For us, the pneuma was placed within us as an act of love, as the ultimate act of Sophia's care for the beings caught inside the system her own error had produced. She could not undo the kenoma, but she could ensure that no being inside it was ever entirely of it. That is what the pneuma is. The insurance policy written by the one who understood the full scope of the situation and wanted to make certain that no amount of archonic noise could permanently extinguish the pleroma's presence in the world the Demiurge had made. Every human being who has ever drawn breath in the kenoma carries it, without exception, without qualification. The pneumatic spark is not reserved for the spiritually advanced. It is not the reward for correct belief or correct behavior. It was placed there before the Demiurge finished his work, before any human choice had been made, before any spiritual path had been walked. It is the ground condition of human existence, not the achievement of it. You had it before you knew it existed. You will have it after you have forgotten again. It does not require your attention to continue existing, but it does require your attention to be recognized, and recognition is everything, because a light that is not recognized is a light that cannot guide you home. The Demiurge has more than one name in the Gnostic texts. He is called Yaldabaoth in the Apocryphon of John, a name whose etymology has been debated by scholars for decades without final consensus, though it carries connotations of chaos and darkness within the Aramaic and Hebrew traditions the Gnostics were drawing from. He is called Saklas in some texts, a name meaning fool, and he is called Samael, the blind god. This name deserves more attention than it typically receives, because it is not an insult in the crude sense. It is a diagnosis, precise, compassionate, clinically accurate. He is blind, not wicked, not malicious, not corrupt, blind. Blindness is a specific kind of limitation. The blind person does not choose not to see. They are not refusing vision out of stubbornness or pride. They lack the faculty. The world they navigate is real, and they navigate it with considerable skill. They develop extraordinary compensating capacities. They build sophisticated models of the reality they cannot directly perceive. But the model, however sophisticated, is not the same as seeing. The Demiurge is Samael in precisely this sense. He has built an extraordinarily sophisticated model of reality. He has constructed a world according to that model with genuine craft and genuine care. He has administered that world with genuine authority and genuine conviction. He is not pretending. He is not posturing. He truly believes, with the full force of a consciousness that has never encountered evidence to the contrary, that his model is complete. And the pleroma is missing from his model entirely. The Apocryphon of John, that remarkable text discovered among the Nag Hammadi library in 1945, describes the moment immediately following the Demiurge's great declaration, "I am a jealous God." There is no other God beside me. It is the foundational self-description of the God of the Hebrew Bible, appearing in Exodus and Deuteronomy, and woven through the entire fabric of the Abrahamic religious tradition. The Gnostics did not dismiss this declaration. They examined it. They asked what it meant, not as a statement of divine majesty, but as a psychological document. What does it reveal about the consciousness that produced it? And what they heard in it was anxiety. A God who is genuinely the sole and complete divine reality does not need to announce that there are no other gods. The announcement is unnecessary for a being of complete self-knowledge, because such a being knows its own nature and has no use for external confirmation of it. The declaration reveals, precisely in its vehemence, that there is something the Demiurge is working against, something he is arguing with, some awareness, too deep and too threatening to be examined directly, that there might be a reality above him that he cannot access. Jealousy itself is the signal. The Gnostics noticed something that theologians in the Orthodox tradition preferred to overlook. You cannot be jealous without implicitly acknowledging a context in which someone else might have what you have. A God who needs to declare his jealousy is a God who is aware, on some level he cannot consciously access, of a relational context larger than himself. He is not lying when he makes the declaration. He believes it completely. He has no conscious access to the anxiety driving it. But the anxiety is there, embedded in the grammar of his own self-description, and the Gnostics read it clearly. Then, according to the Apocryphon of John, immediately after the declaration, a voice comes, from somewhere above, from the pleroma, beyond his reach, beyond his perception. The voice says simply, "You are wrong, Samael." He cannot locate the source. He cannot comprehend the direction it comes from, because his entire cosmological framework does not include an above that exceeds his own position. He cannot see what spoke. He cannot understand what it means. But he heard something his model of reality has no category for, and the Gnostics describe this moment as feeding the anxiety, not resolving it, not enlightening the Demiurge. He is not ready for that yet. But the voice adds to the accumulated evidence that his model is incomplete, evidence he cannot process, evidence that has nowhere to go in his consciousness, except into the wordless unease that drives him to declare his supremacy more loudly, to enforce his laws more stringently, to demand more obedience, more worship, more confirmation from his creation that he is what he believes himself to be. This is the inner life of the blind God, enormously powerful, genuinely creative, administratively precise, and haunted by a voice he cannot locate, from a direction he has no name for, telling him something he cannot afford to hear. The Valentinian teacher Ptolemy, writing in his letter to Flora around 160 CE, articulated the most careful and I think the most honest assessment of the Demiurge's position. Not the perfect God, not the devil, something between, a being who is just within his own understanding, who genuinely tries, whose failure is a failure of vision rather than intention. This is not soft-pedaling the Demiurge's effects. The suffering produced by a cosmos built on blindness is real suffering, but it is an accurate accounting of his nature, and accurate accounting matters. You cannot navigate a system clearly if you misread its fundamental character. Samael is not your enemy. He is your blind architect. The distinction is not trivial. It changes everything about how you relate to the world he built and the patterns he has embedded in consciousness. You do not need to defeat him. You need to see past him. These are entirely different tasks. Now we need to talk about the archons, because the Demiurge does not govern alone. He has never governed alone. And if you want to understand how the Kenoma actually operates, not as a theological abstraction, but as the living system you move through every single day, you need to understand who his subordinate powers are, what they govern, and where you have already felt them operating in your own consciousness without knowing what to call them. The word archon comes from the Greek. It means ruler. Firstly, beginning point, authority. The archons are the Demiurge's co-creators and administrators, the powers through which his world is built and maintained. In the Gnostic symbolic cosmology, they are associated with the 7 classical planets of the ancient world: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon. 7 spheres, 7 governors, 7 patterns of consciousness that together constitute what the Gnostics called the Hymarmen, fate, the system of cause and effect and consequence that shapes material existence from birth to death. The Apocryphon of John, one of the most critical texts recovered from Nag Hammadi in 1945, catalogues the archons with specific names and specific attributes. And those attributes are not arbitrary. They are a precise psychological map, a phenomenology of how consciousness operates inside a world built by a creator who does not know himself. Let me take you through them carefully, because this is where the Gnostic system stops being ancient mythology and starts being a diagnostic tool with uncomfortable precision. The first archon is named Athoth. He is given the face of a sheep. His domain is a distorted version of goodness, a goodness that is actually performed for social approval, that measures its own virtue by the warmth of the response it generates. This is not compassion. This is the part of human consciousness that performs kindness as a transaction, that helps others in order to feel good about itself, that calls approval-seeking generosity. You have felt Athoth operating in you. Everyone has. The second is Eloio, the face of a donkey. His attribute is a corrupted foreknowledge. Not genuine wisdom, but pattern recognition dressed as understanding. The habit of thinking you comprehend something because you have seen its surface before. The person who knows the name of the disease and nothing of the patient. The analyst who has processed the data and missed the truth. Eloio is the archon of intellectual confidence without genuine depth. The third is Astaphios, the face of a hyena. His domain is a distorted spiritual presence. This is the archon of religious performance, of the person who is devout in every visible way and hollow at the center, of spiritual pride, of the confusion between the appearance of holiness and actual contact with anything divine. Every institution that has mistaken its own ritual structure for the living reality that ritual was supposed to point toward. That is Astaphios territory. The fourth is Yao, seven-headed serpent, the archon of fire and jealousy. His attribute is lordship, the drive for dominance, for hierarchy, for organizing every space around your own centrality. This is the pattern that experiences every challenge to its authority as an existential threat, that measures every relationship in terms of status and position, that cannot be in a room without knowing where it ranks. Yao is the archon closest to the Demiurge's own character, which is why you see his pattern most clearly in the structures of power the Demiurge's world has produced, in the logic of empire, of corporate hierarchy, of every institution that organizes itself first around dominance and calls it order. The fifth is Sabaoth, the face of a dragon. His attribute is kingdom, not the act of ruling, but the infrastructure of ruling. Every system that has acquired independent life beyond any human good it was built to serve. Every institution that perpetuates itself long past usefulness, because the structure itself has become the goal. Bureaucracies that exist to justify their own existence. Traditions maintained not because they produce wisdom, but because discontinuing them would require admitting they no longer serve anything real. Sabaoth is the archon of systemic inertia. The sixth is Adonin, the face of an ape. His domain is envy, the mode of perception that cannot experience another person's good without immediately measuring it against your own. The zero-sum mind, the consciousness that mistakes having less than someone else for being harmed by them. Adonin is the archon of the consumer economy, of social comparison, of the platforms designed to ensure you are always aware of what everyone else has, and you don't. The seventh is Sabataios, a face of fire. His attribute is a counterfeit understanding, the confident misapprehension of reality that mistakes its own categories for the structure of the thing itself. The ideologue who has explained everything and understood nothing. The worldview so complete and internally consistent that it can absorb all contradictory evidence by reinterpreting it. Sabataios is the archon of closed systems of thought, the most dangerous kind, because they feel, from inside, exactly like wisdom. 7 archons, 7 fundamental distortions of consciousness. And the Gnostic claim is not subtle here. Look at the world. Look inside yourself. These are not ancient symbols. These are operating patterns in your actual life, today, right now, in how you navigate your relationships, and your ambitions, and your sense of who you are. Then comes the move that separates the Gnostic account of the Demiurge from every other framework of ancient cosmological thought. The move that makes this personal, unavoidably, uncomfortably personal. The Demiurge decides to create a human being. The Apocryphon of John preserves the account in detail. 365 archons are involved in the construction of the human form, each contributing some element of the body's extraordinary complexity. This number is not random. 365 is the number of days in the solar year, the number that binds human existence to the cycles of the material cosmos, to the Haimarmen, to the fate system the archons govern. The description is elaborate. It is, in its own strange way, beautiful, a genuine attempt to honor the complexity of the human organism, while simultaneously diagnosing the nature of what built it. But here is what happens, that the Demiurge does not plan, does not understand, and cannot prevent. As the Demiurge and his archons are shaping the human form, Sophia acts. The accounts vary across different Gnostic texts. In some, she breathes something into the human being. In others, the higher divine power works through her. But the core event is consistent across the tradition. Something is inserted into the human form that the Demiurge has not created, something he does not recognize and cannot account for. A fragment of the pleroma itself. A spark of genuine divine light, enclosed within the material body that the Demiurge's construction has produced. The Gnostics call this the pneuma, the spirit, the breath, the divine spark. And the first thing to understand about the pneuma is that it is not a metaphor, not in the Gnostic account. It is, in their understanding, the most real thing about a human being, more real than the body, more real than the personality, more real than anything the Demiurge's creative act contributed. It is a piece of the pleroma, the fullness, the divine completeness, embedded physically, impossibly, inexplicably within the kenoma, a diamond buried in clay that the clay's maker does not know is there. The Demiurge looks at his creation. He sees the body he made. He sees the psyche, the soul structure that he and the archons have constructed, the complex architecture of emotion and thought and desire and ego that they have assembled with genuine craft. He does not see the pneuma. He cannot see it. It exists on a frequency his perception has no access to, from a dimension of reality that his existence has never touched. He surveys his work and thinks, "This is entirely mine. I understand everything that is here." He is wrong in the most absolute way possible. He is wrong, and the thing he has missed, the pneuma, the fragment of the pleroma, the spark of the fullness hidden inside the emptiness he has built, that is the most consequential thing in the universe. Pause here. Feel the texture of this claim, because it is not abstract. If the Gnostics are accurate, then the most real thing about you is the thing you are least aware of. The identity you have spent your entire life building, your history, your personality, your network of relationships and fears and desires, and self-concept. All of that is, in the Gnostic accounting, the Demiurge's layer, the layer the archons constructed, real in its own domain, capable of genuine experience and genuine beauty and genuine suffering, but not the deepest reality, not the root, beneath it, in a dimension that ordinary introspection does not reach, that ordinary consciousness does not access without the specific kind of inward turn the Gnostic path describes. There is something that came from somewhere the Demiurge has never been. Something that carries within it the quality of the pleroma, completeness, fullness, the absence of the fundamental deficiency that defines everything in the kenoma. The Demiurge has been administering his creation since its beginning. He has shaped the conditions of your existence with his laws, his archons, his Haimarmene. He has structured the world you woke up in this morning according to his principles, and he has done all of this without ever perceiving the most important thing about you, not because he is suppressing it, not because he has identified the pneuma as a threat and chosen to hide it from you, but because a world designed by a creator who does not know the pneuma exists is structurally, inevitably, a world that makes no room for it. That does not honor it. That does not even have a category for it. The Demiurge's world is optimized for Demiurge-level concerns. Matter, energy, biological function, social organization, the archonic patterns of dominance and comparison, and institutional inertia. It is not optimized for the divine spark, because its creator does not know the divine spark is there. You have been living your entire life in a structure built for someone else. Not as punishment, not by malicious design. The Demiurge is not your enemy, we established that. But the effect is the same regardless of the intent. A house, built without accounting for your most essential need, does not become hospitable simply because its architect meant well. The Demiurge does not simply create the world and withdraw. This is the piece that makes the Gnostic account more than cosmological speculation. It is the piece that makes it a diagnosis of the present moment. He governs, he administers. He enforces the Hymarmene, the fate system, the interlocking web of cause and consequence, and biological necessity and social structure that shapes human lives from first breath to last. He is not an absentee creator who built the machine and left it running. He is an active, continuous presence in the architecture of experience. And within this governance, he does something that the Gnostics found both revealing and significant. He establishes religion. He speaks. He gives laws. He makes covenants. He demands worship and obedience. He promises reward to those who comply and threatens consequences to those who do not. He presents himself, in the Gnostic reading of the Abrahamic scriptural tradition, as the total and complete divine reality, the only God there is, the only authority that exists, the horizon beyond which nothing can be imagined. This is not cynical manipulation. Remember what the Demiurge is. He is a being who genuinely believes his own declaration. He has never encountered anything that contradicts it. He is the most powerful being within his experience, the creator of everything within his experience, and therefore, from the only perspective available to him, he is the ultimate reality. His religion is not a lie. It is his sincere account of the truth as he understands it. The problem is that his understanding is not complete reality. His understanding is a bubble within reality, a sophisticated, internally consistent, genuinely powerful bubble, but a bubble with walls he cannot perceive. And now here is the implication that lands with full weight. Because if the Demiurge believes he is the complete divine reality, then the single most threatening thing that can happen within his creation is a human being who discovers otherwise, a human being who awakens to the pneuma within them, who experiences, even partially, even briefly, the quality of the pleroma that the pneuma carries, who begins to remember, in the Gnostic sense of that word, anamnesis, unforgetting, what they actually are and where they actually come from. Because that human being, in the moment of genuine pneumatic recognition, sees past the Demiurge's horizon. They encounter a dimension of reality that the Demiurge's entire system says does not exist, and in encountering it, they recognize, not intellectually, but experientially, that the Demiurge's great declaration is incomplete. This is why the Gnostic reading of the Abrahamic scriptural tradition lands with the force that it does. When the Gnostics read the words, "I am a jealous God, there is no other God beside me," words found in Exodus and Deuteronomy, the foundational self-descriptions of the God of the Hebrew Bible, they heard something the Orthodox tradition preferred to pass over quickly. What kind of God needs to declare himself jealous? What kind of God needs to announce that no other gods exist? A being who is genuinely the complete and sole divine reality has no anxiety that generates jealousy, has no need to announce the absence of competition. The declaration reveals the anxiety, an awareness, however suppressed, however denied, that there might be something above him he cannot locate or account for. The Apocryphon of John describes a moment immediately following the Demiurge's great declaration of supremacy. A voice comes from somewhere above, from the pleroma, beyond his perception and his reach, saying simply, "You are wrong, Samael," using one of his other names, the blind God. He cannot see what spoke. He cannot locate the source. He cannot comprehend what above even means within his cosmological framework, because his framework has no room for anything above him. And so the voice becomes one more inexplicable datum, one more piece of evidence for the deep, unacknowledged anxiety that his system of law and worship and demanded obedience is, in part, designed to manage. Every religion built on the Demiurge's law carries this anxiety in its structure: the need for absolute compliance, the punishment of deviation, the treatment of the divine as an authority to be appeased rather than a reality to be directly known. Not because the people who built these traditions were dishonest, many were genuinely seeking, but because the source they were working from, the Demiurge's revelation of himself, is the account of a being who cannot see past his own horizon. The Gnostics were not dismissing the moral or communal value of conventional religious life. The Valentinian school in particular was quite explicit that the psychic level of human existence, the soul structure the Demiurge and archons constructed, finds genuine nourishment in moral law and ritual and community. That level is real. Its needs are real. The problem arises when psychic religion is mistaken for the totality of what the divine-human relationship can be. When compliance is mistaken for gnosis. When the map is mistaken for the territory. Because gnosis is not achieved through law, cannot be achieved through law. Law operates on the archonic layer. It regulates the behavior of the constructed psyche. It does not reach the pneuma. The divine spark does not respond to commandment. It responds to recognition, to the specific quality of inward attention that the Gnostic path is designed to cultivate, to the moment when the constructed layer becomes quiet enough that what is beneath it can be heard. This is the freedom Gnosis offers that law cannot. Not freedom from the conditions of material existence. Not levitation, not exemption from consequence, but freedom from the automatic, unexamined operation of the archonic patterns, the gradual, daily, recurring expansion of the gap between the arising of a pattern and the identification with it. The space in which the pneuma can be something other than buried. There is no better example of how the Gnostic diagnosis of the Demiurge works in practice than the Garden of Eden. No single passage in the history of religious literature has been read so differently by two traditions, looking at the same words. The conventional reading you already know. God creates paradise. Humanity is placed within it. One prohibition is given. The serpent tempts. The prohibition is broken. The fall occurs. Expulsion follows. The rest of human history is the consequence of that first disobedience. The Gnostics read the same text and heard something entirely different. Start with the prohibition itself. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation the Gnostics were reading, the word used is gnosis, the tree of gnosis. And the question the Gnostics asked was simple but devastating. Who benefits from prohibiting gnosis? If genuine knowledge of good and evil is dangerous to humanity, if it would harm the beings who possess it, then a genuinely loving creator who understood the situation would simply not create the capacity for humanity to desire it, or would create them already possessing the wisdom to integrate it. The prohibition, on this reading, makes no sense from the perspective of a fully knowing and benevolent God. But if gnosis is specifically dangerous to the Demiurge, if humanity's awakening to their own deepest nature would reveal the incompleteness of his claim to be the total divine reality, then the prohibition makes precise, terrible, logical sense. The Creator prohibits the one thing that would expose the limits of his own knowledge. Now read the serpent with this framework. The serpent is not the villain, not in the Gnostic account. The serpent is the agent of higher wisdom, of Sophia, or of the pleroma itself, working within the Demiurge's creation to offer humanity the one thing the Demiurge's law withholds. The serpent offers the possibility of waking up. You will not surely die, the serpent says in Genesis 3:4. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The Gnostics notice something the Orthodox tradition consistently minimized. The serpent is telling the truth. When Adam and Eve eat the fruit, they do not die. Their eyes are opened, exactly as the serpent said. The Demiurge's threat, "You will surely die," turns out to be false. Or more precisely, it is the kind of statement that sounds authoritative and turns out to be a distortion designed to maintain the prohibition, not to protect the creatures it claims to protect. And then watch the Demiurge's response when the prohibition is broken. It is not the calm, measured response of a being whose creation has merely disobeyed a reasonable rule. It is urgent, it is controlling, it moves with remarkable speed. Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. And then the expulsion, immediate, before the tree of life can also be accessed. The Gnostics read the word lest and heard something specific, not divine justice, not righteous consequence. Fear. The Demiurge is afraid. The expulsion from the garden is not a punishment for transgression in the moral sense. It is damage control. An awakening is beginning to happen, and the being who governs this world moves immediately to contain it before it goes further. This reading is not arbitrary or imposed on the text. It follows with logical coherence from the Gnostic diagnosis of who the Demiurge is. A being who believes he is the total divine reality, who has built his entire system around that belief, will inevitably and structurally produce a world that prevents that belief from being challenged, not by calculated malice, by the natural consequence of ignorance operating at scale. Omechi, every system has a self-preservation logic that flows from its foundational premises. The Demiurge's foundational premise, I am the highest God, there is nothing beyond my ken, produces, inevitably, a systemic resistance to anything that would reveal its incompleteness. The garden narrative, in the Gnostic reading, is the first recorded encounter between that systemic resistance and the force that challenges it. The Pleroma's reach into the Kenoma through the offer of genuine knowing. The serpent succeeded, the eyes were opened, and the Demiurge responded with expulsion, but the divine spark was already inside humanity. The opening had already happened. The containment failed in the most important sense, because what Sophia had placed within the human being could not be expelled along with the body. The pneuma went with them out of the garden, into the Kenoma, into the full weight of the Hymarmene, into everything the Demiurge's world subjects human beings to. But it went. It was there. It is still there. The expulsion from the garden, in the Gnostic reading, is not the moment humanity lost everything. It is the moment the Demiurge revealed that he knew, on some deep unexamined level, that his creation contained something he had not put there. His fear is the evidence. His urgency is the admission. The God who declares there is nothing above him acts, in the garden, like a being desperately trying to keep a lid on something he cannot fully account for. That something is the pneuma. That something is you. So let's talk about the machinery. Because the Demiurge doesn't govern the Kenoma alone. He never has. His administration of the material world operates through a system of subordinate powers, and these powers are not vague spiritual abstractions. They are specific, they are named, and the Gnostic texts describe them with a psychological precision that should make you deeply uncomfortable, because when you hear what they are, you will recognize them, not as ancient mythology, as things happening inside you right now. The Gnostics called them the archons, from the Greek archon, ruler, beginning, first principle. 7 of them, corresponding, in the cosmological framework, to the 7 classical planets that the ancient world understood to govern the movements of fate. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, each one presiding over a sphere of influence. Each one a layer of the Hymarmene, the fate system, the invisible architecture of cause and consequence that shapes every human life from first breath to last. But here is what makes the Archon system unlike anything else in ancient religious thought. The Gnostics were not describing cosmic bureaucrats who live somewhere in the heavens. They were describing the fundamental distortion patterns of consciousness itself. They were mapping the specific ways that a world built by a creator without self-knowledge would inevitably warp the interior life of every being within it. Each Archon has a name. Each has an attributed face that is deliberately grotesque, animal, inhuman, a signal that these patterns are not the natural expression of the divine spark, but alien impositions on it. And each has an attribute, a quality that sounds, on the surface, like a virtue, but which in the archonic form is a corruption, a distortion, a virtue that has lost its connection to the fullness that would make it real. The first is Athoth, given the face of a sheep. His domain is goodness, not genuine goodness, performed goodness. The goodness of the creature who helps others in order to feel itself as helpful. The part of human consciousness that gives, in order to be seen giving, that extends kindness as a social transaction rather than as an expression of genuine care. You know this pattern, you have felt it in yourself and watched it in others. The way virtue can become a costume, the way compassion can be weaponized for approval. Athoth. The second is Eloio, with the face of a donkey. Foreknowledge, in its distorted form. Not wisdom, but the counterfeit of wisdom. The intellectual habit of pattern recognition that mistakes familiarity for understanding. The person who has read every book and absorbed no living truth. The expert who knows the name of the disease and has never sat with a patient. This is Eloio's domain, pseudo-knowing, the confidence of the surface, the closed circuit of a mind that cannot be surprised because it has already categorized everything. The third is Astaphios, with the face of a hyena. Divinity, distorted, spiritual performance. Religious pride, the confusion between the appearance of holiness and the reality of contact with the divine. The person who uses the language of awakening as a status signal. The devout person who is meticulous in every outward observance and untouched at the center. Astaphios is the patron archon of institutional religion, not because all institutional religion is Astaphios's domain, but because Astaphios's pattern is the precise distortion that religious life is most vulnerable to. The fourth is Yao, face of a seven-headed serpent, associated with fire and jealousy. His attribute is lordship, the drive for dominance, the need to be the most important consciousness in any given room. The pattern that organizes every relationship around the axis of status, that experiences any challenge to its authority as an existential threat, that cannot receive feedback without hearing it as attack. This is the archon closest to the Demiurge's own character, and it is, not coincidentally, the most culturally rewarded pattern in the world that Demiurge has made. Societies built on hierarchy, institutions built on dominance, economies built on competition. These are Yao's natural habitat. The fifth is Sabaoth, with the face of a dragon. Kingdom, in the distorted form. Not the creative act of ruling, but the self-perpetuation of structure, the bureaucratic pattern, the institution that has forgotten what it was for and now exists to exist. The system that crushes individuals not out of malice, but because the system's self-maintenance has become the primary value. Every organization that has outlived its purpose and cannot admit it, every procedure that persists long after the problem it was designed to solve, has dissolved. Sabaoth. The sixth is Adonin, with the face of an ape. Envy, the zero-sum mind, the perceptual framework that cannot register anyone else's good without immediately measuring it as a threat to the self's own standing. The consciousness that experiences the world as a competition it might be losing. This is the archon of resentment, and he operates in places you would not expect, not just in obvious jealousy, but in the subtle, poisonous habit of comparison that makes joy contingent on others having less. The seventh is Sabadaios, with the face of fire, understanding in its corrupted form. The ideological mind, the consciousness that has assembled a complete account of reality and filters all incoming evidence through the architecture of that account. Confident wrongness, the person who has explained everything and remains radically, structurally closed to what explanation cannot contain. 7 archons, 7 distortions, 7 ways that a world built by a creator without self-knowledge will deform the consciousness of every being it produces. Look at them. Look at your institutions. Look at your own interior life in its most honest moments. Tell me you don't recognize this. Now comes the move that transforms everything. The move that takes the Gnostic account from a sophisticated cosmological critique into something that reaches through 2,000 years and lands in the center of your chest. The Demiurge decides to make a human being. In the Apocryphon of John, discovered among the Nag Hammadi library in 1945, a collection of texts sealed in a jar and buried in the Egyptian desert. Texts that scholars date to the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, though drawing on traditions considerably older. The creation of the human being is described with extraordinary detail. The archons gather. 365 of them contribute to the construction of the human form, each one adding some layer of the body's intricate complexity. The description goes on at length. It is, in its own strange way, a tribute to the human organism, an attempt to honor the staggering intricacy of what it means to exist in a body. But here is what happens that no one in the archonic system plans for. As the Demiurge and his powers are finishing their work, Sophia acts. In some texts it is described as her breath. In others it is the higher divine power moving through Sophia as its instrument. However the specific texts describe the mechanism, the outcome is the same. Something enters the human being that the Demiurge did not construct, did not authorize, and does not recognize. A fragment of the pleroma itself, a spark of genuine divine light, enclosed within the material body like a coal wrapped in clay. The Gnostics called it the pneuma, the breath, the spirit, and they were not using that word metaphorically. This is, in the Gnostic understanding, the most real thing in the universe, more real than the body, more real than the personality, more real than the entire vast constructed apparatus of the Demiurge's world. It is a piece of the pleroma, the fullness, the complete divine reality, the source from which Sophia herself derived, physically embedded within the Kenoma, hidden inside a creature made by a being who has no access to the dimension from which it came. The Demiurge looks at his finished creation. He sees the body, he sees the soul structure, the psychic layer that he and the Archons have assembled, the emotional architecture, the drive system, the personality matrix. He examines his work and he concludes, reasonably from within his limited perspective, that he understands everything that is here. He is wrong in the most complete and consequential way it is possible to be wrong. The pneuma is invisible to him, not because it is hiding in a sophisticated sense, not because it has deployed some concealment strategy, but because it comes from a dimension of reality that his perception simply has no apparatus for. He cannot see it for the same reason that a being who has lived their entire life without the concept of color cannot perceive the difference between red and blue. The category does not exist in his framework. The frequency is not one his instruments can detect. He looks at the human being and sees his creation entirely. He is wrong about the most important thing in the universe, and he will never know it from within his own awareness. But Sophia knows, and the pleroma knows, and the pneuma within the human being knows. At some level that is deeper than ordinary consciousness can access. Sit with the texture of this claim for a moment, because it is not abstract. If this diagnosis is accurate, then the most real thing about you is the thing you are least aware of in your ordinary waking life. The identity you have spent decades constructing, the personality, the history, the catalogue of achievements and failures, and ongoing anxieties and relational patterns. All of that is, in the Gnostic account, the Demiurge's layer. It is the Archon's contribution. It is real in its domain. It is not without significance, but it is not the deepest reality. Beneath it, quieter than any thought you have ever had, more constant than any feeling you have ever felt, further in than the psyche can reach through its own motion. There is something that came from somewhere the Demiurge has never been, something that carries within it the quality of the pleroma, completeness, the absence of the fundamental lack that defines every experience within the Kenoma. You have felt it. Not continuously, probably not even frequently, but you have felt it. In moments when the noise stopped long enough for something else to be perceptible. In the instant after a piece of music does something to you that you cannot account for rationally. In the strange, inexplicable recognition that sometimes passes between two people at the moment of genuine meeting. In the rare, fragile interval when everything you were performing dropped away, and what was underneath was simply, undeniably there. That was not your imagination, that was the pneuma, that was the fragment of the pleroma that Sophia placed in you when the Demiurge was not looking. That was the thing he has been walking past every time he examined his creation and declared it understood. The Demiurge built a world. Inside every being in that world, a piece of the world's source is quietly burning. He has never seen it. He will keep missing it until the apocatastasis arrives and the fog finally lifts for everyone, including him. Until then, it burns. It has always been burning. The Kenoma cannot put it out, because it did not light it. Here is what the Gnostics meant when they called this world the Kenoma. Not prison, not evil, not a place built to make you suffer, something stranger and in some ways more difficult to locate clearly. Kenoma means emptiness, deficiency, the state of lacking the fullness that the pleroma possesses. It is not a description of cruelty, it is a structural diagnosis. The kenoma is what you get when creative power operates without self-knowledge, when a being of enormous capacity builds something magnificent within its understanding and produces, inevitably, a world shaped around everything it does not know it is missing. The Demiurge's world is not optimized for torture. It is optimized for Demiurge-level concerns: matter, energy, biological function, the maintenance of order according to archonic principles, the regulation of cause and effect through the Heimarmane. These are the things he understands, and the world he has built serves them with extraordinary competence. The physics work, the biology works, the social structures, for all their dysfunction, maintain a kind of coherence. What the kenoma is not optimized for, what it has no architecture for, no category for, no accommodation for at all, is the pneuma, the divine spark, the fragment of the pleroma embedded in the center of every human being. This is the most devastating thing about the kenoma, and it is the thing that I think deserves far more attention than it typically receives in discussions of Gnostic theology. The world the Demiurge made is not designed to destroy the divine spark. It is designed in complete ignorance of the divine spark's existence. It is a world built for someone who is not fully you, a world whose entire architecture was planned around the archonic layer, the body, the psyche, the social identity, the system of drives and fears and competitive impulses, and which simply has no room for the thing that is most essentially you, because its creator did not know that thing was there. You have been living in a house that was built for someone else. Every room in it serves needs that are real, but not your deepest needs. Every system in it addresses concerns that are genuine, but not your most fundamental concerns. It is not that the house is entirely without value. It shelters you. It provides structure. It offers, in its own way, a kind of beauty, the cold elegance of well-designed machinery. But it was not built with the pneuma in mind, and you feel that. You have always felt that. The sense that something about your existence in this world is slightly off-fit, that the categories available to you do not quite capture what you actually are, that the deepest thing you carry around has no place to go in the world as it is structured. The Gnostics would say that feeling is accurate. It is not neurosis. It is not the symptom of some personal failing. It is the structurally correct perception of a pneumatic being in a world that was not designed to accommodate pneumatic being. The Gospel of Truth, one of the most remarkable texts recovered at Nag Hammadi, possibly composed by Valentinus himself in the 2nd century CE, opens with an image for this condition that is worth dwelling on. It describes the state of beings who have forgotten their divine origin as existing within a fog, dense, formless, disorienting. In the fog, beings stumble and grab for things that seem stable, and find they are not stable, and fall and grab for something else. This is the kenoma as lived experience, not dramatic, not spectacular, just the constant, low-level instability of existing in a world that cannot satisfy the deepest thing you are and cannot tell you why. The fog is the kenoma. The things you grab for and find insufficient, the achievements that don't sustain the satisfaction you thought they would, the relationships that nourish you without fully resolving the underlying homesickness, the ideologies and explanations and belief systems that account for everything, except the feeling that they don't quite account for everything. These are the kenoma's offerings, real within their domain, insufficient at the level that matters most. And the divine spark within each being is, as the Gospel of Truth implies, a light that is already capable of dissolving the fog, not by fighting it, not by accumulating more things to grab onto, by being recognized, by the being within the fog stopping long enough, in a world that structurally punishes stopping, to perceive the light that is already, has always been, present within them. The kenoma is extraordinarily effective at preventing this recognition, not through conscious design, not because the Demiurge has thought through the suppression strategy, but structurally, inevitably, as the natural consequence of a world built by a creator who does not know the pneuma exists. Such a world will reward motion and punish stillness. It will fill every available moment with archonic noise. It will make the quiet in which the divine spark becomes perceptible feel not like sanctuary, but like danger. Because in a world shaped by archonic patterns, stillness is unproductive, and the unproductive has no value. This is the Knoma's most elegant mechanism of suppression. It does not need to actively silence the pneuma. It simply needs to keep everything else loud enough that the pneuma's quiet signal cannot break through. And a world built by a being who cannot hear that signal will, naturally, without effort, without intention, generate exactly this level of noise. You already know this. You have already felt the Knoma's noise and its weight. The question the Gnostic tradition puts to you is not whether you recognize the diagnosis. The question is what you are going to do about it. The Demiurge does not simply build the world and step back. This is the part of his story that is most immediately relevant to how you actually live inside the system he has constructed. And it is the part that the Gnostics understood with a clarity that remains, 2,000 years later, almost unbearably precise. He governs, continuously, actively. Through the Hymarmene, the fate system, the web of cause and consequence and inherited condition that shapes every human life from the moment of birth. Through the archons and their patterns, embedded not just in individual consciousness, but in the social and institutional reality of the world. And through something that looks, from a distance, remarkably like what most human cultures have called religion. The Demiurge speaks. He reveals himself to prophets. He issues commandments. He makes covenants with specific peoples and demands their exclusive loyalty. He promises rewards to the obedient and threatens punishment to the disobedient. He is, across the major texts that the Gnostics were reading and reinterpreting, first and foremost a lawgiver, a divine legislator, a being whose primary mode of relating to his creation is through the architecture of requirement. The Gnostics looked at this pattern and they asked a question that the Orthodox tradition found deeply threatening. Why does God need laws? Sit with that question seriously, not rhetorically, genuinely. A being who is complete, who is the fullness, who is the absolute divine reality, lacking nothing, needing nothing, the self-sufficient source from which all things derive. What does such a being gain from human obedience? What does it need from worship? What is actually threatened by disobedience? A genuinely unlimited divine reality is not diminished by a human being's failure to comply. It does not require compliance because it has no needs that compliance addresses. The Demiurge's obsession with law, his jealousy, his demands for exclusive worship, his elaborate systems of reward and punishment, reveals, in the Gnostic reading, not divine completeness, but divine anxiety. The anxiety of a being who, on some deep structural level beneath his own awareness, senses that he is not what he declares himself to be, that there is something above him he cannot see, that his creation contains something he cannot account for. I am a jealous God. There is no other God beside me. The Gnostics knew these words. Anyone shaped by the Abrahamic traditions knows these words. Exodus, Deuteronomy, the self-description that echoes through the entire Hebrew Bible. And the Gnostics did something with those words that the Orthodox tradition had always resisted doing. They heard them. What kind of God needs to announce that there are no other gods? A God who is genuinely the sole and complete divine reality does not make that announcement. The announcement is the tell. The declaration of supremacy is the admission of anxiety. What you feel the need to assert is precisely what you are not entirely certain of. A being who was absolutely secure in its completeness and sovereignty would have no occasion for jealousy. Jealousy requires the perception of a competitor. The Demiurge's jealousy reveals, underneath his great declaration, an unacknowledged awareness that there might be something beyond his reach. He is not lying when he makes the claim. The Valentinian teachers were insistent on this. He genuinely believes what he declares. He has never encountered anything in his experience that contradicts it. He is the most powerful being within his experience, the creator of everything within his experience, and from within that experience the conclusion is reasonable. The problem is that his experience is a bubble within a reality far larger than himself. He doesn't know the bubble has walls, but the anxiety that generates the need for law, the need for exclusive worship, the need to prohibit the one thing that might reveal the bubble's edges. That anxiety is the structural echo of the truth he cannot consciously access. The Ptolemy, the Valentinian teacher writing in the 2nd century CE, articulated this in his letter to Flora with unusual precision. He distinguished between 3 possible assessments of the God of the Hebrew Bible: that he is the perfect divine reality, that he is evil, or that he is something in between. The Valentinian position is emphatically the third, not the perfect God, not the devil, a being who is just within his understanding, who genuinely intends good within the limits of what he can see, whose failures are failures of vision, not of will. This is a compassionate diagnosis, and it changes everything about how the Gnostic path relates to the world the Demiurge has made. If he were pure evil, the appropriate response would be contempt, rejection, aggressive withdrawal from everything material. Some Gnostic groups moved in this direction, and the early church fathers found those groups easy to caricature and condemn. But the mature Valentinian position is more demanding and, I think, more honest. The Demiurge is doing his best. His best is insufficient, not because of malice, but because of the fundamental limit of his self-knowledge. You cannot hold a being fully responsible for what its perception cannot reach. What you can do, what the Gnostic path is specifically designed to help you do, is see past those limits yourself, even while living in the world they have produced. And that seeing clearly, that refusal to mistake the Demiurge's categories for the final truth of reality, is the beginning of something the Demiurge's entire system of law and religion is structurally incapable of producing. It is the beginning of Gnosis. And this is where the Demiurge's story takes the turn that almost no popular account of Gnosticism follows all the way to its conclusion. Because the Demiurge doesn't simply create and withdraw. He governs, he administers, he speaks, he legislates. His ongoing relationship with humanity is not the relationship of an architect to a building he has completed and left behind. It is the relationship of a ruler to subjects he requires something from. This is the piece of the Gnostic diagnosis that is most difficult to sit with, because it forces a question that organized religion has never wanted to hear asked out loud. Why does God need laws? Think about that seriously, not rhetorically, not as a provocation, as a genuine structural question about what kind of being issues commandments, demands obedience, punishes deviation, and requires worship. A being who is genuinely complete, genuinely the fullness, the pleroma, the absolute and self-sufficient divine reality, gains nothing from your compliance. It loses nothing from your disobedience. It does not require your praise in order to maintain its coherence. It does not need your sacrifice in order to sustain its power. A being that is already everything lacks nothing, and a being that lacks nothing does not legislate. The Demiurge legislates constantly. He gives Moses the Torah on Sinai. He makes covenants conditional on obedience. He promises reward for adherence and threatens devastating consequence for transgression. He sends prophets with his requirements. He is not merely present in the world, he is endlessly demanding of the world, and the Gnostics looked at this pattern with clear eyes and heard in it something the Orthodox tradition had always preferred to drown out with the sound of worship. The need for law is the expression of anxiety, not wisdom, not benevolence, anxiety. A being who is genuinely the highest reality has no reason for anxiety. Anxiety is the signature of incompleteness, the structural signature of a being that senses, somewhere below the threshold of its own awareness, that its position is not as secure as it declares. The Demiurge's obsession with compliance, his jealousy of other gods, his demand for exclusive worship, these are not the behaviors of omnipotent serenity. They are the behaviors of a ruler who is, on some deep and unacknowledged level, afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of the thing he cannot name, the something above, the voice that comes from a dimension he cannot locate, the divine spark in his own creation that he cannot perceive and therefore cannot control. He cannot identify the source of his unease, but the unease is there. And the response to unease, for a being whose only available mode of relating to the world is governance, is more law, more requirement, more enforcement, more insistence that this, the Kenoma, the material order, the archonic hierarchy, is all there is, and he is its unchallenged lord. Every religion built primarily on the Demiurge's law carries this anxiety in its architecture. It is embedded in the structure, not in the intentions of the people who practice it, many of whom are deeply sincere, but in the organizing logic of the system itself, the need for absolute obedience, the punishment of doubt, the conflation of moral compliance with genuine relationship with the divine, the treatment of God as an authority to be appeased rather than a reality to be known. The Valentinian Gnostics were careful here. They were not saying that moral law is worthless. Ptolemy, in his letter to Flora, one of the most sophisticated theological documents of the 2nd century, made a careful distinction. The law that operates on the level of the psyche, the soul, the constructed human self, has genuine value at that level. Community requires order. The constructed psyche requires moral structure. The human need for shared meaning and ritual and collective practice is real, and the institutions that serve those needs are serving something genuine. The problem is not the law. The problem is the confusion of the law with the ultimate goal. When the law is mistaken for the pleroma, when moral compliance is mistaken for gnosis, when the institution that administers the Demiurge's requirements positions itself as the final mediator between the human being and the divine, that is the moment the Gnostic critique becomes structural rather than merely ethical, because at that moment the finger has been mistaken for the moon, the scaffold has been mistaken for the building it was built to serve, and the divine spark within the human being, which cannot be reached from the outside, which cannot be compelled into awareness, which does not respond to commandment. That spark is being told, by the most authoritative voices the Demiurge's world can produce, to look in the wrong direction. Gnosis is not achieved through law. This is not negotiable in the Gnostic framework. It cannot be achieved through law because the law operates entirely on the archonic layer. It regulates the behavior of the constructed psyche, which is the Demiurge's domain. The pneuma is not reached from the outside. It is not obedient in the Demiurge's sense. It does not respond to commandment. It responds to recognition, to the quality of attention brought to the inward turn, to the honest, humble, persistent desire to know what is actually true, rather than what the Demiurge's system has authorized as truth. This is the freedom that Gnosis offers, that no system of law can provide. Freedom from the anxiety structure that law embeds in consciousness. The person who relates to the divine exclusively through law is always in a position of potential failure, always potentially disobedient, always under judgment. The Demiurge's own anxiety, that unnameable unease about what lies above him, downloads through the structure of law into every person who accepts those terms. You become anxious in the way your God is anxious. You become controlling in the way your God is controlling. You mirror the structure of the relationship you inhabit. Gnosis breaks this cycle, not by rejecting goodness. The Gnostics were not the moral nihilists their enemies accused them of being, but by locating the ground of genuine goodness, not in requirement, but in the pneuma itself. The divine spark, when recognized, when allowed to orient consciousness toward the pleroma, naturally produces the qualities that law was always inadequately trying to compel: compassion, honesty, the capacity for love that isn't conditional on reciprocity, not because a commandment requires them, but because they are what the pneuma actually is when it is allowed to be itself. You cannot genuinely feel the quality of the pleroma's fullness and simultaneously be consumed by comparative envy. You cannot be genuinely oriented toward the true divine and simultaneously be driven by the dominance anxiety that the Demiurge himself embodies. The archonic patterns are not eliminated by gnosis. They still arise, they still present themselves, but they lose their compulsory authority. They can no longer masquerade as the deepest truth of what you are. The law points towards something it cannot itself provide. The pointing has value. But what it is pointing toward is not more law. It is the pneuma, the divine spark, the quality of consciousness that doesn't need commandment, because it has already arrived, however partially and intermittently, at what commandment was always inadequately trying to produce. The Demiurge legislates because he is incomplete. The pleroma does not legislate because it is full. And the most profound act of recognition a human being can perform in the Demiurge's world is to locate, beneath all the noise of law and requirement and compliance and judgment, the thing in them that was never subject to any of it, the root that belongs to the unbegotten Father, the spark that Sophia placed beyond the Demiurge's reach before the first law was ever spoken. There is a figure in Gnostic literature who almost never appears in the popular conversations about the Demiurge, about the Archons, about the nature of the Kenoma and the possibility of escape from it. She is not as famous as Sophia. She does not have Sophia's cosmic stature, but I keep returning to her story because it does something that the grand cosmological accounts, for all their magnificence, cannot quite do on their own. It makes the whole thing personal, immediate, practically urgent in a way that no amount of theological architecture can achieve without a human face to look at. Her name is Norea. She appears in 2 Nag Hammadi texts, the hypostasis of the Archons, the reality of the rulers, and a shorter document known as the Thought of Norea. She is presented as a daughter of Adam and Eve, a figure absent from the canonical scriptures entirely, placed by the Gnostics at a specific and very deliberate moment in the story of the world, the moment when the Archons come for her. In the hypostasis of the Archons, the archonic powers approach Norea with intent. They want to bring her under their authority, to absorb her into the Kenoma's system, to reduce her to the level of their world, to make her subject to the High Marmene, to claim dominion over her the way they claim dominion over everything else in the material realm they govern. They invoke their authority. They press their claim with the full weight of their archonic power, and Norea refuses. Flat, absolute, unequivocal refusal. And when the Archons press harder, when they invoke their dominion over all things made of matter, over all things born into the Kenoma, she does something the text describes with startling literalism. She breathes on them. She breathes fire at them from her own breath. The pneuma within her, expressed as the breath of genuine knowing, repels the archonic claim with a force the Archons are entirely unprepared for. They cannot withstand it. They retreat. They cannot touch her. Not because she has spoken an incantation, not because she has performed a ritual, not because she has done anything external at all, but because she knows what she is, and what she is, the Archons have no category for. They are reaching for something they cannot grasp, the way you cannot grasp light in a closed fist. It simply moves through where your hand was. This is the image I come back to whenever the Gnostic system threatens to become too abstract, too cosmological, too removed from the texture of daily life. The Archons reaching for Norea and finding nothing their hands can hold, not because she is stronger than them in the terms of raw material power. She isn't. The Archons vastly exceed anything available to an individual human being within the Kenoma, but because the pneuma within her is from a dimension they have no access to, the pleroma is to the Archons what a frequency is to a receiver not built to receive it. It is broadcasting continuously. They cannot hear it. She can, because she contains in her deepest root the substance that resonates with the source. And then Norea cries out. This is the part that moves me most. She has just repelled the Archons with the fire of her knowing. She is, in that moment, demonstrably not subject to their power, and she still cries out to the highest God, not the Demiurge, not the Archon's master, but the true divine source, the invisible spirit, the monad, from a position of still being in the Kenoma, still surrounded by the archonic world, still navigating a reality built by a creator who does not know what she is. Gnosis is not escape. This is what Norea's story is saying with extraordinary precision. Gnosis is not a ticket out of the material world. It is not a permanent state of frictionless enlightenment in which the archonic patterns simply cease to exist around you. Norea cries out. She is in the world. The Archons are still present. The Kenoma is still the Kenoma, but she knows her root. And knowing her root, she can call on something the Demiurge's entire governance structure has no jurisdiction over. A divine being appears in response to her cry, an angel of the pleroma, sent because the pleroma hears what the Demiurge cannot. And what this being tells Norea is the most compressed, most essential statement of Gnostic anthropology in the entire Nag Hammadi library. You are not from them. Your root belongs to the unbegotten Father, not your body, They made that. Not your psyche, they shaped that. Not your social identity, your history, your network of relationships and obligations and fears that constitute the surface self. All of that is the Kenoma's contribution, and the Archons have a genuine claim on it, in the sense that it was made in their world according to their principles. But the root is not theirs. The root was planted by Sophia from the Pleroma when no one in the Archonic system was watching. And the root cannot be claimed, cannot be grasped, cannot be made subject to Archonic authority, because it does not originate in Archonic reality. Your root belongs to the unbegotten Father. This is the sentence I want you to carry out of this entire account, not as a piece of theological information, as a lived orientation, as the thing you return to when the Archonic system, in whatever form it takes in your specific life, in your specific circumstances, in the particular pressures that the Kenoma exerts on you, reaches for you, and claims ownership, because it will. This is the daily, practically urgent version of Noria's situation. Not a cosmic confrontation with robed beings in the afterlife. The moment when the system of comparative evaluation tells you your worth is determined by your position in a hierarchy. The moment when the institutional voice tells you that access to the divine runs through its approved channels, and not through you directly. The moment when the internal Archonic pattern presents itself as your deepest nature, and tells you this is who you are, this is all you are, this is the final truth of your existence. Noria's response is not elaborate. It does not require a theology degree or a decade of mystical practice. It is, I know what I am, and what I am, you cannot touch. The fire in the breath is not a magical power. It is the simple, devastating fact of genuine self-knowledge operating in the presence of a system that depends for its authority on your not knowing what you are. When you know, when the pneuma within you has become sufficiently conscious of itself that you can recognize the Archonic claim for what it is, the claim loses its compulsory force, not permanently, not without the need for ongoing recognition, but really, actually. In the moment of genuine knowing, the Archons are reaching into a fire that moves through their hands. Noria's story is the Demiurge's entire cosmological account, compressed into a single human encounter. The Archonic system at full extension of its power, the pneumatic human being in the fullness of her knowing, the unbridgeable gap between what the Archons can grasp and what the divine spark actually is. This is the promise the Gnostic tradition has been carrying across 2,000 years. Not that the world will become less Archonic, not that the Demiurge will step down, not that the Kenoma will transform into the Pleroma overnight. The promise is simpler and in some ways more demanding than any of those. The promise is that what the Archons cannot touch in Noria is also what the Archons cannot touch in you. The root is the same root. The fire is the same fire. The unbegotten Father to whom her root belongs is the same source from which your pneuma came. The Archons have been stumbling around it your entire life. They cannot see it. They cannot hold it. They never could. Now you know why. There is a dimension of the Gnostic account of the Demiurge that academic scholarship has begun to recover and that popular presentations almost never touch. It concerns gender. Not gender as contemporary identity politics, and not gender as the rigid binary the ancient world enforced, but gender as a cosmological principle, as a structural feature of the Gnostic diagnosis of what is wrong with the world the Demiurge has made, and what genuine wholeness actually requires. The Gnostics lived inside one of history's most thoroughly patriarchal social arrangements. The Roman world of the 1st and 2nd centuries CE organized everything around a hierarchy, so embedded it was largely invisible to those inside it, the way the architecture of a room is invisible to people who have never been outside it. Male was associated with mind, reason, spirit, activity, the divine. Female was associated with matter, body, emotion, passivity, the earthly. This was not merely a social convention. It was treated as a fundamental feature of reality itself, encoded in philosophy, in law, in religious practice, in the implicit grammar of how the cosmos was understood to be structured. The Gnostic cosmological framework does something with this binary that is still startling when you see it clearly. It inverts it, completely and deliberately. The Demiurge is male. The Archons are male. The entire archonic power structure, the hierarchy, the dominance, the legislative apparatus, the enforcement of categories and divisions and subordinations, is masculine in the Gnostic symbolic framework. And the Demiurge's maleness is not incidental. It is the structural expression of what he is, a being organized around authority, hierarchy, division, the enforcement of boundaries between what he controls and what he does not. He relates to his creation through law, through commandment, through the establishment of rank. These are the modes of the archonic masculine operating at cosmic scale, the divine spark hidden within his creation. The pneuma, the fragment of the pleroma, is described in feminized terms throughout the Gnostic texts. It carries the signature of Sophia, the feminine divine wisdom whose fall and hidden action embedded it in the material world. The seed of genuine divine presence within humanity is associated with the feminine principle. And Sophia herself, the one who fell, yes, but also the one who acted, who hid the pneuma within the Demiurge's creation, who cried out from the lower realms and was eventually restored. Sophia is the carrier of the higher wisdom that the masculine Demiurge cannot access. The highest divine reality, the monad, the invisible spirit from which everything ultimately derives, is described in the Gnostic texts as existing beyond gender, or as containing both masculine and feminine principles in a unity so complete that the division between them does not operate. The pleroma's syzygies, the paired aeons who exist in complementary relationship, model a reality in which apparently opposite principles are not hierarchically ranked, but dynamically integrated. Neither dominates, neither is subordinate. They are, together, more than either would be alone. The Demiurge cannot imagine this. This is one of the clearest marks of his ignorance. He organizes everything through hierarchy. Every apparent opposite in his world is also a ranking, one side above, one side below, sacred and profane, clean and unclean, obedient and disobedient, male and female. The binary itself is the problem, not the existence of difference, but the compulsive need to arrange difference into subordination. This is the archonic mind, operating at its most fundamental level, the inability to conceive of relationship without domination. The Gospel of Thomas contains a saying, attributed to Jesus, that the Gnostic tradition understood as pointing directly at this. When you make the two one, when you make the inside like the outside and the outside like the inside, when you make the above like the below, when you make the male and the female one and the same, then you will enter the kingdom. This is not a statement about biological sex or social gender roles. It is a statement about the nature of pneumatic consciousness. The kingdom, not a place, not a future realm, not something granted as reward for compliance with the Demiurge's law, is a state of consciousness in which the archonic compulsion to divide, rank, and subordinate has been dissolved by the recognition of the pneuma. The integrated completeness of the pleroma has become, in some measure, the quality of the individual's own awareness. The Gospel of Philip develops this further through the concept of the bridal chamber, one of the Valentinian sacraments, and arguably the most misunderstood. The bridal chamber is not an external ritual in the primary sense. It is the inner event of the reunion of the masculine and feminine principles within individual human consciousness. The psychic layer, the constructed self, the archonic architecture, and the pneumatic layer, the divine spark, the Sophia-derived seed, brought into integration rather than opposition. The marriage is internal. It is the restoration of the syzygy within the individual being, the living of the pleromatic pattern of complementary unity inside the conditions of the kenoma. Christ, in the Gnostic accounts, is described as the androgyne, the being who embodies both principles without subordinating either. Not masculine in the archonic sense of dominance and law, and not feminine in the archonic sense of passivity and subordination, but the living integration of both, the walking embodiment of what the pleroma is when it expresses itself in the kenoma. The Gnostic Christ is not a lawgiver. He is a revealer, not a commander but a mirror, the kind of presence in which other people's divine sparks recognize themselves. The Demiurge, purely masculine in the archonic sense, cannot produce this. His world can produce hierarchy, It can produce law. It can produce elaborate systems of ritual that look like spiritual integration, but are actually the archonic compulsion to organize and rank, expressed in religious form. What it cannot produce is the genuine interior marriage, the authentic integration of the pneumatic and psychic dimensions of the human being, because it does not know the pneumatic dimension exists. And here is the implication that I think matters most for how you actually navigate this. Every time the archonic system in you, in your own patterns of consciousness, not just in external institutions, compulsively ranks experience, compulsively divides reality into hierarchical binaries, compulsively positions some part of you as dominant over another. That is the Demiurge's organizational logic running in your own consciousness. The part of you that cannot rest until it has established whether you are above or below someone else in some dimension of comparison. The part that cannot hold tension without resolving it into a winner and a loser. The part that treats your own inner life as a territory to be dominated by the correct beliefs, rather than a space to be inhabited with honest attention. All of that is archonic. All of it is the Demiurge's mode of relating to reality, the only mode he has, filtering through the psychic layer he constructed. Gnosis, in this register, is not the victory of one part of you over another. It is the cessation of the war, the recognition that the opposition the Demiurge's system requires is not the final structure of reality, that the pleroma is not the winner in a contest with the kenoma, that the pneuma is not in competition with the psyche, that the divine spark does not overcome the constructed self. It illuminates it, transforms it, reveals it as what it always was beneath the archonic overlay, a temporary and genuine expression of the pleroma's capacity for self-knowledge, in conditions it could not have known without the kenoma. The Demiurge made a world of division. The pleroma is a reality of dynamic integration, and gnosis is the slow, difficult, recurring practice of letting the pleroma's mode of being become, increasingly, imperfectly, genuinely, the mode in which you inhabit the Demiurge's world. He cannot imagine that. He has never seen it. He has walked past it in every human being who ever discovered it. That too is something he will understand only at the end, and perhaps that understanding is its own kind of homecoming, not just for the divine sparks returning to the pleroma, but for the Demiurge himself, finally seeing what was in his creation all along, the integrated wholeness he was always, without knowing it, trying to produce. We have arrived at the end of the Demiurge's story, not the end as the Demiurge understands it. He does not know his story has a shape, does not know it is moving toward anything other than the perpetuation of the world he has built, and the enforcement of the hymarmene he administers. But the end as the Gnostic tradition saw it, with the long, patient, heartbroken clarity of people who had looked at the kenoma without flinching, and still found in it the evidence of something the Demiurge himself could not see. The Gnostics called this end the apokatastasis, the restoration of all things. It is not a battle. There is no cosmic war in which the forces of the pleroma defeat the forces of the kenoma in a final confrontation. The Gnostic eschatology is more strange and more beautiful than that. The kenoma does not end through destruction. It ends through completion, through the gathering of every divine spark that was ever embedded within it, every fragment of the pleroma that Sophia's hidden action placed within the Demiurge's creation, until the last spark has been recognized, has oriented toward its source, and has found its way home. And what happens to the Demiurge when this occurs? The Valentinian texts give an answer that is unexpected enough to stop you. The Demiurge is not destroyed. He is not condemned. He does not simply disappear. In the eschatological account of the mature Valentinian tradition, when the apokatastasis arrives and the pleroma is restored to its fullness, the Demiurge ascends. He takes the position of ruler of the intermediate realm, the space between the kenoma and the pleroma, the realm of psychic existence that is above the purely material, but below the fully pneumatic. Not elevated to the pleroma itself, that belongs to the pneumatic souls who carried the divine spark through the long exile of material existence, but not lost, not annihilated, recognized, at last, in his proper place, no longer claiming to be what he is not, no longer declaring there is no God beside him, because now he can see, Now the fog has finally, fully lifted, and what he sees is the pleroma he spent his entire existence denying. The voice that said, "You are wrong, Samael," the voice that came from somewhere above, from a dimension his perception had no access to, that he could not locate and could not comprehend, and that fed, without his ever knowing it, the deep, unacknowledged anxiety at the center of all his legislation and all his demand for worship. That voice, he now understands, was not his enemy. It was the pleroma, reaching across an unimaginable distance, trying to tell him what he was. He was not ready to hear it then. He is ready now. This is a notably merciful ending for a being who was, in the Gnostic account, the architect of so much human suffering. But the mercy is consistent with the diagnosis. Ignorance is not the same as evil. The Demiurge was not wicked, he was wrong, and wrongness, when it is ignorance rather than refusal, responds to the restoration of knowledge. When the apokatastasis comes, the ignorance dissolves, not as punishment, not as humiliation, but as the natural consequence of a being finally, fully encountering the reality it has always been operating within without knowing it. There is something in this that I find almost unbearably poignant. The Demiurge, throughout the Gnostic narrative, is the figure of enormous power and fundamental limitation. He builds a universe, he fashions consciousness, he legislates and administers with everything he has, and all of it, the staggering apparatus of material existence, the archonic hierarchy, the High-Marmine with its gravitational certainty, the laws spoken to prophets and the covenants made with peoples, and the centuries of worship demanded and received. All of it was happening inside a bubble of reality that was itself contained within something the Demiurge had never perceived. He was always already within the pleroma's domain, he just didn't know it. The fullness surrounded his emptiness from the beginning. The Kenoma was never outside the pleroma, it was within it. A region of diminished awareness within a reality of absolute completeness, the way a shadow is within light, even as it appears to be the absence of light. And through the long history of the Kenoma, through every divine spark that recognized itself, through every human being who woke to the pneuma and oriented toward the pleroma, through every moment of genuine gnosis, transmitted from teacher to student, and every glimpse of the fullness breaking through the fog of the Kenoma. Through all of this, something was happening that the Demiurge had no framework to understand. He was being taught. The divine sparks he did not place in his creation were, in finding their way home, illuminating the space through which they moved. The Kenoma was becoming, incrementally, more porous. The archonic hold was loosening, not through defeat, but through recognition, as each pattern was seen through and named, and no longer operated with automatic compulsion. The wall between the Kenoma and the pleroma was thinning, not by force, but by the patient, recurring, humble, honest work of pneumatic consciousness, becoming conscious of itself within the conditions of the material world. And the Demiurge, through the accumulating evidence of what his creation was producing, through the realities he could not explain, and the voice he could not silence, and the sparks he could not grasp, was being drawn, against every declaration he had ever made, toward the fullness he had always denied. This is the most astonishing claim in all of Gnostic theology. The Kenoma educates the pleroma about itself. The fall of Sophia was not a catastrophe without purpose. It was the condition under which a dimension of reality came into being that could not have existed otherwise. A dimension in which the pleroma's own self-knowledge deepened through the experience of its own apparent absence. The ignorant Demiurge, in building his world in that ignorance, was, without knowing it, without intending it, serving something larger than his understanding could contain while he remained ignorant. His world was not a mistake to be corrected, it was an experience to be integrated. And the integration is the apokatastasis, not the destruction of the Kenoma, but its fulfillment, filled, at last, with the fullness that was always hidden within it, the emptiness revealed as having always contained, at its heart, the light that could not be extinguished. Sophia fell. The Demiurge was born. He built a universe in his ignorance, and administered it with his power, and declared his supremacy over a reality he had never fully seen. And into the center of all of it, Sophia hid the one thing that would unravel the whole architecture from the inside. Not a weapon, not a rebellion, but a spark. A fragment of the fullness, the most real thing in the universe, placed inside every prisoner in the prison the Demiurge believed was perfect. He built the prison. He did not know about the key. The key has been there since the beginning, in you, in every human being who has ever drawn breath in the Kenoma and felt, beneath all the archonic noise, the quiet, persistent, indestructible pull towards something they could not name, but could not stop reaching for. That pull is the pneuma, recognizing the pleroma, that homesickness that nothing in this world fully satisfies. That is not pathology. That is not a symptom of something broken in you. That is the divine spark doing precisely what it was placed here to do, reaching toward the source it came from, through the conditions of a world that was built without any knowledge of its existence. The Demiurge is the god of this world. His world is real. His archons are real. The weight of living in a world shaped by a creator who does not know himself is a very real weight, and it would be dishonest to minimize it. The Kenoma is not easy. It was not designed to be. It was designed without intention, by a being who had no access to the fullness that would have made it otherwise. But you are not only his. You were never only his. Your root belongs to the unbegotten Father, and that root is indestructible. The archons have been stumbling around it your entire life. The Demiurge has walked past it every time he looked at you. He has never once perceived the most important thing you contain. He made the world. You carry the answer. And the pleroma that sent you here has never stopped sending, has never once ceased broadcasting on the frequency that the divine spark within you was made to receive. The full story of the Demiurge ends here, with him still standing at the gate of his creation, still declaring his supremacy over everything he can see, not knowing that inside every one of his subjects is the seed of the world's completion, not knowing that the light he cannot perceive is already doing its work, already illuminating, already dissolving the archonic density, already drawing everything, including the Demiurge himself, back toward the fullness from which, in some sense, neither of them fully understands. Everything came. The restoration is real. The pneuma is real. The pleroma is real, and it is reaching. Listen for it. You always could.